Hello, everybody. This is Of Mountains and Men. I am Peter Myers, and with me is
Rhys Gadbois.
And we are here today just to get into the next little section of this two-parter that we're doing, sort of going through each of our stories. Last time we dove into some more details on my story, and this time we're definitely going to take a deep dive into Rhys's story and see about that. But before we do that, just a reminder to everyone, if you have any questions or episode ideas or things you want us to talk about or anything else, feel free to email ofmountainsandmenpodcast@gmail.com. We'll have that in the description. Yeah, is there anything else you want to add before we kind of dive in, Rhys?
Yeah, if you're a student of mine and you're listening, just ask me in person. I'm not sure I want you sending me a message on a different Gmail account. Like, it's technically the podcast is Gmail.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
Just,
Yeah.
just ask me in person at school.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's like technically fine, but I just, the way things are. I can't say how many times I'll be teaching or having like a work day in class, like we're preparing for a discussion or a seminar, and I'll hear in the background all of a sudden my voice. And I'm like, are you guys playing my podcast right now? They're like, yeah, we are. I'm like, you guys are so annoying.
I feel like they do that to you probably just to mess with you.
Oh, yeah, they definitely do. Yeah. They're not actually listening. No, I'm joking. Some are listening, but it's fun. Shout out to the students who listen.
Yeah.
You're my favorite. Because teachers do have favorite students.
They just don't tell people usually.
They just don't know. You're just different types of favorite,
Yeah.
But yeah.
Cool. Well, so yeah, let's dive in. I mean, I know last time we kind of started with a little bit of background of where you're from, what your kind of family was like growing up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I grew up in the Pacific Northwest. I was born in Bellingham, Washington, which is about an hour, maybe even less, an hour south of the Canadian border.
Oh, wow.
So grew up, Bellingham. I was technically living in this place called Sudden Valley, which is like a smaller town in the greater Bellingham area, I think. And I grew up, I was actually like, the house I lived in from like ages 1 to 5 was like this cabin house. It was in the woods. And as a 5-year-old, I obviously did not appreciate it. But now looking back on it, I think to myself, that would have been the best house to just grow up in.
Mm-hmm.
It was too small for what my family, my mom, dad, brother, and sister would grow up to be. But it was a cool place.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we had mountain lions in our backyard.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, one of my earliest memories is waking up and my mom being like, you guys can't go outside. And we were sitting along the couch looking up to the backyard window. And I remember seeing a deer on the ground in the corner. And it was alive, but it was wounded.
Oh.
And my mom was explaining to me that a mountain lion had attacked it in the middle of the night. And we had this dog. He was a border collie named Simon. And he was a pretty good-sized border collie. He was larger than the average, but he was also a really, really good dog. Incredibly protective. My mom got him as a gift from my father before they got married. And I remember, like, my mom would tell me stories that whenever I would hang out outside in this cabin house, Simon would walk between me and the property line. He was very protective.
That's cool.
Yeah. And my dad was like really into roughhousing, never over the top by any means, but Simon couldn't tell the difference. So if my dad was roughhousing with me, Simon, he wouldn't be super aggressive, but he would try and like nudge himself between like my dad and
wow,
and
that's
me.
really cool.
So good dog. But Simon, who was a good sized border collie, actually like scared off the cougar before it could finish off the deer. And so I was like, kind of like, cool, good job, Simon. But I remember like NDR or whatever had to come and pick up the deer, and I'm pretty sure they put it down.
I was gonna say, like, the only sad thing about that is that it almost might have been better for the deer to just be killed. But
yeah, I'm pretty sure the deer died. But yeah. So I grew up. So it's kind of like I grew up in the woods. Well, I was born in an area that was really woodsy, and then when after I turned 5, I remember we moved closer to Seattle because my dad worked for Hertz Rental Car.
Oh.
He had worked for them since he was like 18.
Interesting.
Yeah, my dad didn't go to college. He like graduated high school, and then I think he went to someplace in Arizona, some location. The location shut down within a year, and then he went up north to Washington.
Wow.
Yeah, so because he was born in California and grew up in California. But
really,
yeah, my dad's a SoCal.
I don't think I realized that because both of our dads were born in California then and grew up in California.
Yeah, and what part of California was your dad?
San Francisco.
Yeah,
area,
my dad was San Diego. area.
Nice. Wow.
Yeah. No, he actually went to the same high school as a friend of mine from college.
Oh, wow.
Like I had this friend
That's
from
crazy.
college. We were chit chatting, and I was like, "Oh, what school do you go to?" Or like just high school conversations come up. And then my friend, he came, Brian. He came to Washington over the summer to hang out, and he was talking about the school he went to. And my dad's like, "Wait," because like the school that my dad went to had a different name at the time.
Oh.
And so the name changed. And my dad knew the name changed. He's like, "Wait, didn't that school used to be called like X?" And Brian's like, "Yeah." And my dad's like, "That's the exact same high school I went to,"
Wow.
which is pretty wild. But yeah, my dad grew up in SoCal, but he moved up because of work, and he like lived in a trailer by himself, working at this Bellingham airport. And that's where he met my mom. Who my mom was a military brat, so she moved around all the time, nonstop.
Oh,
like
okay.
North Dakota. She actually was technically born in California, like not too far from my father, I think, which is wild.
Wow. Yeah.
But she kind of lived all over the place, and then she settled. Her family did in Ferndale, Washington, which is around Bellingham. So after I turned 5, my parents, we all moved to Everett, Lake Stevens, Washington, which is about half hour, 45 minutes outside the city of Seattle.
Okay.
Lived there until the age of 12, and then we moved a little bit deeper into the mountains, which was still about 45 to 50 minutes away from Seattle, to a place called Granite Falls, Washington. If you've ever watched Gravity Falls, like from Disney, like Granite Falls is like Gravity Falls. Okay, it's just this small town where everyone kind of knows each other. Not super small, but just one school, one grocery store. There's a main street.
That sounds awesome.
It was pretty cool. Meth was a big deal there.
Oh,
though.
well, that doesn't sound awesome.
No, like drugs were a big deal. Apparently, Oprah like had one of our townspeople like on her show or whatever as someone who like overcame meth addiction. I remember in 8th grade I was playing football and I would walk home from practice, and I was walking home and my mom like picks me up. She's like, "They're raiding the meth lab at the top of our neighborhood." I'm like, "Okay." She's like, "Yeah, you can't walk by. We have to drive through." Like, great, awesome. So,
Oh man.
we all knew it was a meth lab. Like, I think I remember moving in. My dad's like, "That's a meth lab, just so you know. Like, just be careful when you're hanging out around there."
Oh man.
Yeah, but they did raid it, and they raided it successfully. And my dad is now a real estate agent, so he was allowed. Like, he actually was able to get access to the house after it was raided. So my dad took me into the house, but the thing is I wouldn't know, but apparently when you cook meth, like it gets into the walls, like it's like everywhere.
Oh, that's weird.
So you have to tear down the house from the inside, basically. So when it was sold, that's what they did. They like a lot of construction work, like a contractor showed up and they just basically redid the entire house. But now, from my understanding, just families live there and they seem pretty at peace and happy.
That's good.
Yeah, but I remember going inside the meth house and just like weird things were written on the wall, like "I'm sorry, Mom" and stuff like that. So,
Oh man.
yeah, good times. But yeah,
Yeah, what was it like growing up in like a small town like that? What was your experience with that?
I thought it was great because you and I were kind of alive at the time where parents started to become a little more anxious about how far their kids went from home, but they're not as anxious as they are nowadays. Because nowadays it's easy to distract a kid. Like we had TV back then, but now we have phones. And you and I were born during a time, like I think when you and I were in middle school and high school, phones were like a thing, but they were like the dinky flip phones.
Yeah, exactly. And not everyone even had them in my
exactly
experiences.
And texting still costed money. There wasn't a thing like unlimited texting.
I forgot about that. Yeah.
You remember you could only text people with like
Yeah.
if you had Verizon, texting was free with other Verizon people. But if you had a friend who had like Singular or AT&T, you're like, crap, it's gonna cost me like money to talk to you. But wild times. But so we were kind of like on the brink of like where people were nervous, but also parents still let their kids kind of go out. So when I lived in that small town, I think I remember right around the time I turned 13 or 14, I was allowed to go wherever I wanted in that town. So I would ride my bike everywhere. There was a skate park.
Nice.
I really got into longboarding. I forget what age I really got into longboarding. It was probably 8th grade where I really got into it. And because I grew up in a mountain town, the town was filled with hills. So, and my own neighborhood actually had a pretty good sized hill in it. So I remember my cousin Connor, and my brother, we would just longboard until like midnight. Oh my gosh, dude! I can't tell you how much I loved longboarding, and I still do. Like I remember longboarding in Denver, like during the pandemic, because we're all trapped at home, and I'm like, honey, I'm just gonna go ride for a little bit. And I actually ride with my kids a little bit in our neighborhood because they see the longboard and like they like to stand on it while I like ride it with them, which is cool. But yeah, growing
Wait,
up,
so
yeah.
sorry,
No, go ahead.
just to explain to everyone and also to me because I don't know if I actually understand fully. Is longboarding just like a bigger skateboard? Kind of like what is?
Yeah, so skateboarding is not really focused on cruising.
Okay.
Skateboarding is focused on. Well, there's two types of skateboarding. I don't know their exact names. I wanted to be a skateboarder at one point, but I could never just like land any special tricks. And actually, honestly, skateboarders. There's a lot of virtue in skateboarding, believe it or not, because there's a lot of videos of skateboarders just like throwing fits and getting angry all the time. But there's a lot of fortitude that is required to be an adequate skateboarder. Like no one lands a kickflip on their first try. They probably have to try it hundreds of times. And maybe someone's out there like, I landed it on my 20th attempt. I'm like, okay, we'll forget you. But I never landed a kickflip. I don't think I ever got the board to flip a full rotation. But skateboarding, there's two types. There's like flat ground skateboarding where people just do tricks. There was like a famous flat ground skateboarder named Rodney Mullen who would just do some wild things on a skateboard. And then there's like vert. Well, there's more than two types. There's vert skating, which is like on big ramps. And then there's kind of street skating, which is like rails and small jumps and stuff like that, or really anything that you can create with the street. I wanted to do all of those, I guess, and I couldn't. But longboarding was more focused on just cruising.
Okay.
And the trucks, so there's the board. Okay.
Oh yeah.
Now the thing underneath the board that the wheels are attached to are called the trucks. Okay, and the trucks are how you steer because they bend. All right. Skateboarding trucks can do the same, but they're not as flexible. All right. So longboarding trucks are a lot more durable. They're a lot stronger, I would argue, and they're more geared towards maneuvering. Where I have a longboard, and if there's a crowd of people, like I could maneuver around them pretty easily. Not easily, but it's doable for sure. Like I can take a sharp turn on a longboard. You can't really take a sharp turn on a skateboard. You have to like pivot or something. So
Interesting.
yeah, longboarding is longer boards, usually trucks that are more geared towards cruising, and larger wheels, better wheels for grip actually.
Okay.
And there are tricks in longboarding. People can do kickflips on longboards. But what people are really into is going down hills and sliding on longboards. And I kind of got into sliding, but never enough to like really like push it. Like I was able to do like a 180 slide at once. I haven't done it in a long time, but slide. It's kind of like snowboarding in that sense, like the sliding aspect.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
If people in with snowboards, but longboarding is primarily connected to surfing. Like there's a famous magazine called Concrete Wave because there's this understanding that longboarding is just surfing. But
interesting.
Ground.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So longboarding is kind of like this combination of snowboarding, surfing, but also different in its own way.
Cool.
Yeah. So did a lot of longboarding in that town. I also just loved growing up in the mountains. My goodness. I totally took it for granted, man. Like there was this mountain called Mount Pilchuck, which I remember. You ever watched the Grinch Stole Christmas, but like the Jim Carrey version?
I love that one. Yeah, that's the one that I prefer.
So the mountain in the Jim Carrey version looks like, I think, the mountain that I grew up right under.
Nice.
Mount Pilchuck. So I always would think that, and like when you would get a crap ton of snow during the winter, I'd be like, that looks just like that mountain.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So I loved growing up in the mountains. I definitely took them for granted, but they were all around me. Like we would maybe get no snow in Granite Falls, but if I had a half hour up this highway called Mount Loop Highway, the road shuts down during the winter and people just take their snowmobiles and just ride on the road for hours.
Dang.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, it was gorgeous. So yeah, it was nice living in a small town. I miss it actually. I miss it a whole lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was your like family life growing up? Like you have 2 siblings, right? So
yeah, so I'm the oldest, obviously. I'm joking. I've been told the oldest gives off vibes. My students say I don't give off oldest vibes. So like, you give off like mid-child, you know, like always seeking attention, Mr. Gadbois. I'm like, okay, thanks guys, I appreciate that. I'm joking. They've only said that to me like twice.
I feel like you kind of give off oldest vibes.
Thank you, Kafis. That means a lot to me. But yeah, I'm the oldest. I don't really remember when it was just me because it was only me for about 2.5 years when my brother was born.
That's fair.
Yeah. I mean, my earliest memory is at 2.5. Like,
wow.
Yeah, I remember because it was when my brother was born and we showed up to the hospital. And apparently I had flowers in my hand because my dad like went and got flowers for my mother. and I don't remember having them, but I remember them pulling back the curtain as we went into the room where my mom and my brother were, and just being struck with fear and running over, like, because there were all these people in the room. And I just remember being struck with fear and running right next to my mom and just laying my head down next to her.
Oh.
Yeah. So, what's your earliest memory? Can you
I know. I honestly don't know if I remember. That's always been a funny question. People
just ask yourself what's traumatized me in my life, and then ask how far back that goes.
Well, I know that's the thing. Yeah, exactly.
Because I remember I wasn't traumatized, but I remember being afraid of all these. I used to be such a scared kid. I did not like large groups. Did not like people. I did not like loud noises. There's like pictures of me at the King Dome, which is where the Seattle Mariners used to play baseball and the Seahawks used to play football. And I'm just covering my ears the entire time. Which, I mean, it's loud. Like,
I mean, yeah,
it's known for being loud there.
For a small kid, that seems like it'd not be super fun.
But yeah, so I was a skittish kid. But yeah, so I was born. Then my brother came 2.5 years later. My brother Dante, and then after 5 years, I want to say, after my brother was born, my sister showed up. Yeah, Dominique. I have a sister named Dominique, a brother named Dante, and my name is Robert or Rhys.
Well, yeah, I was going to say maybe you should explain the Rhys thing then, but
yeah. So my full name is Robert Rhys Gadbois the Fourth, in the French, Robert Rhys Gadbois. And so I'm the fourth, like I just said.
Mm-hmm.
My grandfather was Bob, God rest his soul, and then my dad was Robbie. So by the time you get to the fourth, you've got to be kind of creative with the name. So you take Robert and Narcisse, and my parents liked the phonetic sounding of both those, and they just put it together and got Rhys. Robert, Narcisse, Rhys. Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah, and Rhys is spelt in like a weird Welsh way, but we're not Welsh at all. It's like RHYS.
Yeah.
Can't tell you how many times I've had my name mispronounced, and I don't care. Like I like, unless like I've been talking to this person a lot, I'm like, okay, buddy, like freaking get it together. But I've never really gotten upset. People are like Rice.
Rice.
There was this girl in college who would call me White Rice, which was really fun.
Oh my gosh! Actually, that'd
be if I ever become like an R&B.
Yeah, that's what I was just thinking. That's like your rap name or
what
something.
What up? It's White Rice. Yeah. So yeah, that was my family dynamic. Yeah, I was homeschooled for a little bit. Well, most of my pre-collegiate career, I guess. I remember going to preschool, kindergarten, and first grade. Shout out to my kindergarten and first grade teacher, Mrs. Ogden, who was a stud. She was a really good teacher. And I would have been homeschooled in first grade, but my mom liked Mrs. Ogden so much that she was like, no, let's have Rhys go one more year. Also, I'm sure my mom was perfectly fine with that, having me out of the house for one more year.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I was homeschooled from second grade up until my sophomore year of high school.
Okay.
Which was okay.
Yeah, what did you think about that?
Here's the thing. I like who I am, and being a homeschooled kid definitely made me who I am.
Mm-hmm.
If I had gone to the public school system or even the private school system, I don't think I would have turned out the way that I am. So I'm happy that I was homeschooled in the long run.
Mm-hmm.
But in it was really tough because despite being struck with fear by large groups at a young age, I became kind of a social butterfly, and just not necessarily a social butterfly, but I wanted to be around my friends all the time. And I remember all my friends who like went to school would complain nonstop about school, but I was just like, you don't get it, man. Like they're like, no, Rhys, like we want to be homeschooled like you too. That'd be so great, just doing school in your PJs. I'm like, no, man, like you guys get to see your best friends every day. That sounds awesome. And that's what I really wanted. My parents, they made sure I did sports very frequently, especially baseball, because I loved baseball. So there was like a time of year where I saw my friends every day or every other day because of practice and games. Mm-hmm. But man, it was tough. It was definitely tough being homeschooled. Also, I never was able to compare myself academically to others. I could compare myself to my brother, but he was 2 years younger than me, and then my sister, who was 7 years younger. So I was always like uncertain. I'm like, am I actually smart? Am I actually like good at this stuff? Because I'm the top of the class, but I'm also at the bottom of the class because it's just me. But homeschooling worked pretty well for me because I was a pretty self-efficient, self-motivated kid. Mm-hmm. My mom did a pretty good job at at valuing self-efficiency, which I think is necessary for homeschool kids, especially when they get to a certain age. So homeschooling really helped me develop positive study skills because there were times where I had to teach myself certain things.
Mm-hmm.
And to be honest with you, like a lot of adults experience this. There's a lot you can teach yourself that you just don't need a teacher for, you know?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like
yeah. Oh, yeah.
like math teachers are like, I will say this, the math department is easily, in every school I've been at, the most well put together department. You know, they've got their stuff together. They're like locked in, and you really have to be with mathematics. But Khan Academy, are you familiar with Khan Academy?
No, I don't.
It's this free website that just has lessons for every subject. Math, algebra, pre-calculus, like through the roof, and it's free.
Mm.
So, because I was goofing around with Khan Academy for a little bit when I was considering like becoming an engineer, and I was like, what's the need for high school teachers when you have something like this?
Yeah.
You know? So there's a lot of stuff that you can teach yourself, or at least use resources for free outside of the classroom.
Yeah. I mean, that's an interesting perspective too, because I guess kind of two things. One thing that strikes me about just in general what you were just saying is the fascinating comparison of. I think it's important to realize that I think a lot of people have, because I think about this for myself too, that I think most. Well, maybe not most people, but a lot of people, I think, would have a tendency, because we always do that whole grass is greener on the other side thing, that like, you know, like how like it's just funny to think about that your friends were like, yeah, Rhys, like we wish we were homeschooled. That'd be so cool. And you're sitting there like, yeah, I wish I was in school. Like, you know, like I feel like we all often like wish we were doing the thing that the other people are doing, because like, oh, it's so much better. Like our thing sucks and their thing's so much better. And it's like,
yeah,
everyone that like there's drawbacks and positives to every like thing that can happen, everything we do or whatever. I don't know, that just strikes me in that as like an interesting, because I don't know if I've heard that perspective that much, but I think that makes a lot of sense though, that like, because definitely you hear that, you know, like from like public school kids or private school kids or whatever, of like their frustrations with their schooling in their own way.
Yeah.
And then you hear it from homeschool kids, like, you know, the drawbacks that we experienced or whatever. And so it's like, really, there's not one. Yeah, I don't think one's just like clearly better or whatever. I know. Actually,
that's more nuanced.
Yeah, there is more nuance to that. But yeah. I feel like I was going to comment on something else, but that's fine. I don't remember what it was. So.
It's all good. But what I will say is like, I'm definitely thankful. Like, I mean, immensely thankful for the sacrifice that my parents and primarily my mom made to homeschool me and my brother and sister. Yeah, it was a big sacrifice. My mom gave up a lot of time, and I also was able to learn a lot of things that I feel like a lot of other kids in the public school system were not learning. I think we never did classical education at home, but we did study classical topics. So I had a pretty good memorization of dates and certain like classical figures that a lot of my classmates don't, and it's been really helpful throughout my teaching career to like fall back on. So,
that makes a lot of sense. Actually, that was the other thing to the point you just made that I was going to kind of comment on a little, is like, I think it's interesting that like the perspective of, there's a lot of things that I think we assume that one needs a teacher for nowadays, and to be very clear, I'm not trying to like cast aspersions or be mean to anyone who teaches these topics or these subjects, but I think the reality is, from a lot of people I've talked to, I was a missionary at MIT, like there's a lot of like, especially STEM things that like you don't necessarily need a teacher for, in one sense. Like you can kind of you can do just as well basically teaching yourself that thing if you have the materials in front of you. Like that was kind of how I learned math. Like, and even like how we learned science and stuff. Like I was homeschooled, and like the math thing, we had like a little, I forget what it was called now, but we had this thing where it had like, granted it was sort of a teacher because it had like these little like lessons where they would like talk to you or whatever. But it was just like a quick like kind of lesson thing that was basically just walking through like, this is how you do this thing in math. And then it was like, go do it. I mean, and that's very different. That's very different, though, I guess is my point, than like the classical, kind of like on our teaching podcast from, you know, a few episodes ago when we were talking about like the more proper classical model of teaching of like a dialogue and like working through things in a classroom with your teacher in this like kind of back and forth, like there's a huge difference between the teaching of like philosophy and theology and, the more art type aspects of things than there is between like something where there's a clear cut and dried, like, here's what you should do, how you should do it, and go do it kind of thing.
Yeah. I think this is why math teachers struggle to get their kids so involved, because you're literally just going over numbers. And there's a practicality to it, don't get me wrong. I mean, to a certain extent. I'm not convinced that every kid needs to be taking pre-calculus in high school. Unless you want to become an engineer or a physicist, I don't know what you're doing. Like, why are you taking pre-calc? You want to go become a historian? You're wasting your time, buddy.
Yeah.
So, but when the rubber meets the road, I think this is why I view engineering or physics as kind of the classical form of, or I guess it's the application form of mathematics, obviously, but it's the really interesting type because you are doing that classroom discussion, but just with a situation that requires math to figure out,
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's why the Greek philosophers were really into geometry, because they're doing philosophical proofs with structures and shapes.
Oh, yes.
And they're making deductions. Like if you get two lines that intersect like a cross, you can guarantee that the angles on the opposite side of the point are the exact same.
Yeah, exactly.
And like, every circle we know is just 360 degrees. And if this one angle in that circle is 85, we know that the remaining angle is, subtract 85 from 360. Yeah. So so I think that's why the Greeks like that so much, but it is difficult to get kids to see that.
Yeah.
But a lot of that other stuff is easily like self-taught. So, which I think is what ended up happening to me. I did have lessons and I did watch them, but most of the lessons, like in school, even like the math teachers, what are they doing? They're like, let's go over. I'm going to show you how to do this problem. Now do that a bunch of times.
No, exactly. That's what I mean. Yeah. It's there's not a whole lot of interaction in that sense. And but yeah. So you said that was through sophomore year. Did you end up going to a public school or a Catholic school or another private school after that? Or
so in the state of Washington, there's this program called Running Start, where your junior and senior year of high school, you can start attending the community college full time or part time.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's what I did. I attended Everett Community College for my junior and senior year of high school full time.
Wow.
And I graduated high school not only with a high school diploma, but with an associate's in arts and science degree already.
Wow.
So I got 2 free years of college.
Damn.
I mean, it's an excellent program.
Yeah, that's awesome. I like that.
Yeah, I think Hawaii does it and a couple of other states. And I know kids can kind of go to the community college now, like dual credit or whatever.
Yeah.
But I don't know why everyone's not doing it. Like the first 2 years of college are not that much. Like it's basically high school repeated.
I mean, I can tell you why people aren't doing it.
Well, I know why people are doing it. There's money involved.
It's because the colleges don't want them to, because they lose a bunch of money if you think about it.
Well, also the high schools don't want them to.
Well, sure, both don't. But the point is, like, because that's a much cheaper option when you think about it. Because
for sure.
You skip 2 years of high school and you skip 2 years of like some really expensive 4 years college, like
for classes that you could take for $500.
Exactly, because a lot of those first 2 years are a lot of those general studies, gen ed kind of classes that you get in college that are like you could take those anywhere. Like,
and then the crazy thing too is the classes if you're a high schooler and you're doing Running Start, you only pay $500, I think, a year or a quarter. When in reality, it's $500 typically per community college class.
Oh yeah,
I'm sure it's up.
No, I know. Yeah.
So it's a huge money saver.
Yeah,
it's insane.
Wow.
So yeah, I think this is why I don't like AP classes, because AP classes have this status of like, oh, these are where all the smart kids are, but you don't have to be a whiz kid to get an associate's degree in arts and science or associate's degree in whatever.
Mm-hmm.
You can keep it pretty simple.
Yep.
And so you don't. It's really easy, and also like with AP credits, they're not guaranteed transferable.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Depending on how well you do on the AP exam. But if you have credits from a community college, guess what? Those credits are transferring.
Yep.
Like it's just no one's going to say no to that. So like English 101 or AP English, people take AP English for an entire year and they complain about it nonstop. They write all these papers, they evaluate Shakespeare, and then they take the AP exam and they get a 3. Okay. Boom. Right. Unless you're going to some local college, you're a 3 in most cases. I think is just not going to be accepted by the university you're attending.
Mm-hmm.
But I took English 101 in 10 weeks and I wrote maybe 6 papers.
Yeah,
6 1.5 page papers.
No, I know what you mean. Yeah,
and I got the
did that
exact
when
same
I was in community college. Yeah.
Yeah, and I got the exact same credit.
Yep.
that a kid in AP English didn't get, but they put in a lot more work.
Yep.
So it's backwards to me. But there's no incentive because, like you said, the colleges would lose money, and high schools would lose students.
Yeah.
And so therefore they would lose money consequentially, whether or not they're private or public. So yeah, I think it's a complete crime that Running Start's not more popular. But yeah, so I did that to my junior and senior year of high school. And
Nice.
Yeah, it was good.
So before we get into like college time and everything, what was your kind of like faith life growing up in your family, or kind of your own experience both?
So I don't really remember a lot from ages 1 to 6 or 7.
I mean, makes sense.
I remember going to church sporadically throughout that time.
Okay.
My parents, I don't think, knew exactly what they wanted to do. Both my parents grew up Catholic. My mom's father, Grandpa George, was a deacon actually in the church, which is really cool. He had this radical conversion where I think he grew up Catholic because he was German. His parents, he's a first generation immigrant, Grandpa George, and he grew up Catholic, but I think he kind of fell away from it or just became kind of like a guy who goes through the motions. I'm not exactly sure. And then he met this Protestant pastor who really kind of ignited a love for Christ and a love for the church. And my grandfather wanted to convert to Protestantism. And believe it or not, the pastor looked at him and says, "No, you need to go back to your church." So the Protestant pastor told my grandfather,
Praise God
"No,
for that guy."
he's like, you cannot leave the Catholic Church," which is just insane. Like I don't know who said that, don't know his or maybe hers name, but praise God for them. So my grandfather decided to become a deacon, and apparently at his ordination, he like I know you probably have your opinion on the charismatic movement, and I definitely do too. But apparently, my grandfather, who like didn't speak in tongues, from my understanding, wasn't extremely charismatic. Like at his ordination, like spoke in tongues, like had this overwhelming grace from the Holy Spirit.
Huh.
Yeah, when like he wasn't doing that at all, because you get these people who like do it all the time, and maybe it's real, who knows? But there's part of me that's like, okay, how much is this? Like tongues seems to me to be like this divine possession of the Holy Spirit where you don't really remember what was happening.
Yeah.
And that's what my grandfather described. And for the rest of his life, nothing like that really happened. So that was like,
it's a cool grace.
Yeah, it's a very beautiful grace that he experienced at his ordination. And so my grandfather on my mom's side and my grandmother started to take their faith much more seriously towards the end of their life. And I think that left a big enough impact on my mom and my dad. And they decided, like, no, we do need to be going to church. We weren't exactly sure, I think, if we wanted to continue being Catholic. But I think what I remember is in 3rd grade, we had officially established ourselves in a Catholic church, Holy Cross Catholic Church in Lake Stevens, Granite Falls, Washington.
Nice.
That ended up being my parish until I went off for college. So I was baptized in the Catholic Church as a baby, pretty like relatively early by my grandfather, who was a deacon, and
that's cool.
All my siblings were baptized by him as well. Then, like I said, we were iffy going to church after that, but I didn't receive my first communion until like 4th grade. Usually it's 2nd grade, but that's just an example. That's just a sign of the back and forth that we were kind of doing for a little bit. So, but by 3rd grade, we had established ourselves in a Catholic parish, and then I remember receiving my first communion the next year, which was cool because like all my friends were receiving communion, and I was like super embarrassed to be this older kid not receiving it. But it was super cool when I got to receive my first communion. But yeah, when we plugged ourselves into that parish, my parents are incredibly friendly. Okay, they love people. My mom is very social. My dad is incredibly social. Okay,
I've met your parents, and I can attest this is definitely true.
my parents were devastated when they didn't get to hang out with you more. Like, because they were here a couple weeks ago.
Oh,
like a
that's
month
right.
ago.
Yeah.
My dad was like, "I really wanted to hang out with Peter, Rhys." I'm like, "I know, Dad," but they were here for like 4 days. It was like crazy.
I mean, next time they come, let me know.
Oh, for sure. But my dad is just this social butterfly, and I've yet to meet a guy or gal who is not fond of my father. And it's like, and he was just an excellent dad too. Like I look at myself as a father, and I'm constantly comparing myself to him. Like I feel like you hear most stories of like, oh, my dad, he did things, and I'll just never be like that. And I'm trying to work through these scars or whatever. And that those are real things, But that's just not my story with my father. I look at my father as someone who I'm constantly aspiring to be like, and I'm continuously failing. Like my dad is so gracious and so easygoing, and I'm this stress monkey who who freaks out when like you're 10 minutes late to something. And my dad's like, Rhys, it's fine. Like, don't worry about it, man. Like, everything's gonna be good. Just say you're sorry and move on. So, a lot to learn from my father.
Wow.
But he's a really good man. So, yeah, they really plugged us in. They made friends really fast at Holy Cross. Friends who we're still close to this day, and they still hang out. And my mom and dad have a winery, which I'll get into later. But these friends like show up to the winery and they talk nonstop. So, yeah, we plugged ourselves into this parish community. I made friends pretty quickly too because my parents made friends. I remember my friend Duncan, who I think is in Japan right now teaching. He was like my first friend I made at this parish. My friend Logan, who I think he and his girlfriend have a dog cleaning business on Whidbey Island, which is one of the San Juan Islands.
Wow.
Yeah. So these are friends who I made from like 3rd grade, 4th grade onward, and other friends as well joined. And I remember having these awesome like youth ministers who were like completely volunteer based. I don't think any of the youth ministers I had throughout high school were ever paid a single dime.
Nice.
Entirely
like
volunteer.
That.
And they were studs.
Yeah.
Holy crap.
That's awesome.
Okay. Like, and I'm going to forget some names. So if any of you guys are listening, because I know some of them do listen, but like Mary Pratt, okay, who I know listens to our podcast, is like awesome. Okay. I remember her just having her, I remember like taking like classes with her or whatever. And she just has her massive catechism. And I know she was like really learning it along the way, but she was like loving it. And I could see that joy in her. She's super sweet. Carol and Monty Marty, who were like this couple. Oh my gosh.
Nice.
Carol and Monty, those two, just absolutely beautiful people. Great family. Monty Monty would do this thing at potlucks where he could not stand it when people would waste food, which I think is a virtue.
Yeah,
okay?
absolutely. I mean,
definite virtue. But he had a background where, you just didn't waste anything. Okay. So you used everything, which is something I think we could grow to appreciate more nowadays and model that type of virtue. But Monty would do this thing at potlucks where when the potluck was over and the food had been out for a while, where he would just put it in his own bowl and just start eating it. Like the leftovers. He would eat it. And get this, Monty was a stick. Like,
that's what I was going to say, though.
Dude.
Is like, because when you get like really large doing that.
But he's super skinny.
He must have had a really fast metabolism.
Well, the dude didn't drive a car to work. He biked everywhere.
Oh, okay.
He's done several like cross country like biking trips, and he loves them. So Monty was so funny. Carol was great. Oh my gosh, I've had a lot of deep conversations with her and Monty. I think Monty might have been one of the first Catholics I met who wasn't overly dependent upon like the retreat model, where we have a high on a retreat and we use that high to carry us, into the next retreat. Monty, I remember going to like my second Steubenville conference.
Yeah.
And Monty was there. I'm not sure if Monty was there on the first one, but Monty was there on the second one. And I was talking about like, this is so great. This is an excellent reset. And he looked at me and he's like, Rhys, like these retreats are great and everything, but they don't they don't leave that impression on me. I'm like, why? He's like, because I'm praying all the time. Like I'm always retreating.
Praise God.
Yeah, and
guy.
and I just remember thinking about that. I'm like, that's where I need to be. I shouldn't be. Yep. I shouldn't be like, I just got to like wait till the next conference or the next retreat to like get my juice back. But Monty's like, no, like prayer is what does that.
Yeah.
So he was one of the first like men of prayer that I really met, like a true man of God.
Nice.
And so yeah, he was a huge impact to me. I'm trying to see. The Shilleys, Norm and Tracy. There's another. I know there's other people I'm forgetting, and I feel so rude. Crap. But just a lot of people like left a big impact on me. So it was a great parish. So we actually had mass in a middle school because we had a very small. Like we were originally a mission, and I think we had just been declared a parish.
And they never built a church.
So they had a small church, okay, but the congregation was way too big for it. So like Saturday night masses were at this parish or at the church building, okay, Saturday evening vigils, because it could actually fit people in there. I want to say the capacity of that place was maybe 50, but our parish, if I were to guess, was like probably about 1,000 people. So it was originally a mission, and I think the archdiocese moved Holy Cross from a mission to like an actual parish, like around the time we started joining.
Okay.
And so they had mass actually at a local public middle school. Yeah, which is insane.
That's interesting.
It is interesting, but it's the only space we could get. And
But
then
did they work toward building a bigger church at some
Oh
point?
yeah,
Okay,
they've done it
okay.
now. Yeah, it was
Okay.
clearly a transitional period.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's
They,
fair enough.
they bought
Okay.
property really fast.
Okay.
And so they bought property really fast, and we would actually have like a church picnic once a year and actually have mass on that property.
Oh,
Yeah,
nice.
so-
Okay.
And then by the time I was in, I want to say, by the time I was in middle school, we had already built a larger church on that property.
Okay.
So from about
Nice.
third grade, so by the time I was in 6th and 7th grade, like they moved pretty
So it
fast.
was like 4 years or
yeah,
something. Yeah, that
yeah.
makes
So
sense.
they completely got out of the middle school at that point,
Nice.
and had mass in an actual building. But that was just a transitional building. They wanted to obviously get out of the middle school as soon as possible. So they built that, started having mass there. And then I think when I was in college, they finally built an actual like church,
Okay.
which I've been back to a couple times every time I go back to Washington. But yeah, it was weird because we were kind of like this small church that was growing.
Yeah.
And these families, we were all really close, we were really tight. You know, they're people who I'll never forget. And I was close with the kids, with their kids, best friends throughout all of high school. And we went on retreats. We had these experiences together. We grew in our faith together. And it just had a huge impact on me, like really, really inspired me. So yeah, I had excellent youth group leaders. And
Nice.
so I'm trying to think, but I actually need to backtrack a little bit.
Mhm.
So my mom, I talked about my dad being like an excellent example of virtue. My mom was probably one of the first like women of prayer who I really, really got to know in my life. Like I remember like my mom, to give her some credit, like, but also like, I'm not trying to say this as a negative, kind of had like this Protestant approach to like prayer, you know, like accepting Jesus as your savior kind of thing.
Yeah.
Which is nothing necessarily like sacramental about that, but there is something I think still powerful about not necessarily like renewing your baptism, but making in like a personal choice to begin taking certain things seriously and say, this is the moment where I'm going to take God more seriously.
Oh yeah,
And
absolutely.
I think I remember doing something bad and talking to my mom about it. I had to have been between the ages of 5 and 8. I don't know. It's a decent sized window, I guess. But in like a 3-year window. And I remember something happened and I just told my mom, and my mom's like, Rhys, you know, like God doesn't want you to do these things, you know, and like, you know, you can get rid of these things and you can become a better person. And you simply need God. You need Jesus to help you with that. So,
Wow.
And my mom's like, you want to say a prayer with me to accept Jesus? You know, like kind of like this really Protestant thing. But I still remember it to this day, having like this powerful moment of prayer with my mother that I honestly haven't reflected on in quite some time. And I remember from that moment on, I was like, I'm going to take this like pretty seriously, or pretty serious. So from that point on, my faith was a big part in my life. Honestly, I kind of assumed everyone was Christian. Like I remember our first interaction where I asked them like, do you go to church? Like, where do you go to church at? Like just assuming they already went. And they're like, we don't go to church. And I was like, what? Like, you don't do that? You know? I was like, I thought everybody went to church because it just had such a positive impact on my life. And so I took my faith seriously. It was definitely fostered through the parish I attended at Holy Cross, through all these people, these witnesses, these adults and these other kids. Then throughout homeschooling, my mom, we obviously had a theology class. We studied the scriptures. So I went into college. When I went to Franciscan to study theology, I actually had a pretty solid foundation, I would argue, compared to most other classmates.
Probably.
Because of the education curriculum my mom chose. So, yeah, my mom did a lot to instill the importance of the faith early on. And to be honest, it wasn't like I was definitely not a saint.
I mean,
you know, I was a kid. I made some pretty big mistakes, definitely in middle school and high school. You throw girls into the equation, you know, and you're a young adolescent kid.
Guy, so yeah.
Yeah, and it's not a justification for who I was or the decisions I made, but I definitely like, okay, God, like take a back seat for a second. I'm gonna just focus all my attention on this girl. My first girlfriend was in like 8th grade. My parents originally put a rule on me that I couldn't date until I was 16. But you know,
I guess that didn't last.
It didn't last. It just didn't. So I started doing sports for the Granite Falls Middle School, which, like, even though you were homeschooled in the state of Washington, you could still compete for the public school teams.
Oh, that's cool.
So I started playing football, and then I started running track, and I played a little bit of basketball. Was never really good at basketball, but I played a little bit of it. And so I got to meet a lot more people when I was doing these sports, and a lot more people, a lot more girls. And I was like, Mom, there's this girl I really like, and she really likes me. And my mom's like, no, you gotta wait. And then, like, I think like the 5th time or whatever, there was like a girl that my parents like were liked, and like they knew her mother, and they're like, okay, you can date her. All right, in 8th grade. And yeah, that was wild. But I remember I was such an idiot. My mom and I were talking about this last time she visited. She was telling me, she's like, Rhys, you were like, you just give your all to everything, whether or not it's good or bad. Like, I'm happy I never got hooked on drugs, because I would just be like an all-out drug addict. I'm like, I got to give myself. I got to go 110%, you know, which is a weird thing to say. But I was dating this girl in 8th grade, and my mom was like, Rhys, you're a kid. Like, just take it easy. Like, you don't need to, like, get super serious with this girl. And my mom was saying that my response was, no, Mom, I care about her, and I need to be there for her, and I need to make her my number one priority, because that's what people do in relationships. They put others first. And, like, you take that quote and you're like, oh, that's nice. But when it's coming from a 14-year-old's mouth, okay, who's got a lot of other things to worry about, you're like, okay, kid, get off your high horse. Like, take it easy. You're not marrying this girl, you know, like, slow it down. But that's just how I acted with my relationships, which arguably wasn't the healthiest at that age. There's a lot of other things to focus on. But it definitely led to some problems.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair, but that's actually kind of cool though. Like, well, first of all, it's funny to me. The reason I was chuckling there is because I have always had a tendency to do that myself, actually, to like go all out on things. So it was just funny to be like, this might be part of the reason that we've like bonded over time and stuff too, is like, I think we have similar personalities in that way. But yeah, I mean, that's also like fascinating, because that's actually really like profound and beautiful in some ways that you had that desire. It's just like you said, that definitely isn't the right time in life to be approaching that. Partially because I would say the biggest thing is just that you don't know yourself enough at that point too, because the ability to give ourselves completely in a relationship and, you know, be the everything for the other person, all that, you have to really know yourself first. And at age 14, you're definitely not at that point. So
yeah, I don't know who looks back on their younger years and thinks that they weren't an idiot.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think that's part of just like life. Like, we're young and we
of course. We make mistakes. So, but it's just a testament to the fact that clearly we don't really know ourselves at that age. And yeah, so yeah, it was up and down in my faith. It always mattered to me. I always believed God, that He was real. But there were times where I definitely treated sins in my life with varying levels of respect or attention, saying like, oh, this sin's okay, or like, I know it's not okay, but who cares? Like, it's something that I want to do, so I'm going to do it anyway. And yeah, I just remember struggling a lot with those things, and I always wanted to be like a good man, you know. I always wanted to be loving, compassionate, and caring towards others, and respectful to them. And yeah, I definitely look back at it just with disappointment. I could have been. I remember someone saying one time that you should always treat a girl in a specific way, that if you ended up not marrying her, you could shake her husband's hand confidently on his wedding day, on the day he marries like your ex-girlfriend or whatever.
Yeah.
And that's something I strived for, and that's not something that but it's not something I consistently like lived by, unfortunately. I wasn't like a terrible person, but it's, you know, I was a stupid boy who wishes he just could have been a nicer guy, you know?
Yeah.
And I think I was a nice person, but it's just, you know, I wish that I'd just been more mature about certain things, definitely. So those are definitely like the sins I struggled with the most, you know, with regards to like chastity and everything. And I remember like my last Steubenville conference, just talking to like two of my best friends from high school, Blake, who is my oldest son's godfather.
Oh, nice.
and my buddy Eddie Cho, who I haven't talked to in quite some time, but he's pretty busy. He's an engineer now, and just kind of like breaking down and sharing with them like my struggles, my faults, and they just exemplified like mercy, like God's love and mercy and acceptance to me. And then Monty, I remember talking to him that night too, because I had snuck out of like the dorms to hang out with Blake and Eddie that night. I'm about to go on a Steubenville conference with students, so you guys, if any of you are listening, do not sneak out. But I did, and
Well, you will know. That's the thing. If they sneak out, you'll know.
I should know, yeah. But I think I snuck out the window or something and just hung out with them. We were doing good things, like, but we shouldn't have been sneaking out. And then I came back and Monty caught me, and then Monty and I just like chit chatted, and I was like, dude, I haven't been like the greatest person, I feel like, and I haven't been the virtuous person that I know I should be, that I know you call me to be. And I wasn't struggling with anything abnormal that like most high school boys don't struggle with.
Sure, yeah.
But I just, my mom, my family, my youth group, they just kind of instilled like, just because everyone else is like this doesn't mean it's okay. So that the moment of prayer helped a lot. And even then I wasn't really a perfect guy either. And I still am not a perfect person, obviously. But those were sins I definitely struggled with at that moment. But yeah, so I decided, I think around my junior year in high school, that I was going to attend Franciscan University of Steubenville because a lot of my friends were going to state colleges. But I just knew that if I went to a modern place, I just wasn't going to do well.
Yeah.
Like, praise God, I had enough self-awareness in that moment to think, okay, Rhys, you can't handle that situation. You will fall into sin. Okay? Just like everyone else is at these schools. And I had friends saying things like, no, I want to go to these schools because I want to challenge myself to like overcome them. And I respected that 100% at the time. But I just knew myself enough to say, yeah, Rhys, you're not going to be able to pull through here. So you need to surround yourself. And also, dude, like I remember like my freshman year or like 8th grade year going to freshman year of high school. I went to my first Steubenville conference. And I know people have like their takes about the Stubby conferences, and I get them, 100% do. But they were instrumental in my spiritual journey. And I remember two things from that first conference. One, falling in love with the Catholic tradition, like the simplicity of it.
Nice.
It's like just the fact that, everyone is saying mass in the world, and it's the same mass for the most part, you know what I mean? Like on paper, it's the same liturgy. They're hearing the same readings.
It's the same Eucharist.
It's the same Eucharist.
It that way.
Yeah,
That's
same
the most
Eucharist.
important thing.
Same Eucharist, same readings, and I just found that to
It's not
be
always the same readings, but it's the same Eucharist.
right. I just find that to be very unifying. Yeah, depending on like local traditions. Yeah, but I just loved that, and I could go to mass 1,000 miles away, and it wouldn't be radically different. It should, in most cases, it wouldn't be radically different from what I'm experiencing. So I fell in love with that, the simplicity of the Catholic faith, and then just like looking around at like 1,000 kids and chaperones and a few other adults, and just realizing that we were all focused on one goal, and that was God, and feeling close to everyone in the room. And I realized in this moment, I'm like, this is kind of what heaven's like, where we're all focused on the supreme good. And because we're all focused on the supreme good, we're united together, despite not exactly knowing each other.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is what I want, which makes sense because everyone desires heaven in their hearts. So it was kind of like a rediscovery of something that was already there. But that's, I think, junior year of high school. Like originally I wanted to be the quarterback for the University of Washington football team, but I can't throw a football I can't throw a football over 40 yards. So that just was not going to happen.
Yeah, that's unfortunate.
And I think I remember my sophomore year in high school or junior year in high school realizing that was not going to happen. And then that day I got a letter from Franciscan University. Not like just like they send out pamphlets to kids who go to Steubenville conferences, just like let them know. And that's, I was like, I think I'll go there. And then I just thought about it more and I'm like, yeah, the conferences were like heaven to me, or a taste of it. And Steubenville sounds like it'll be the same thing. And I don't think I was wrong. Like going to Franciscan was exactly the right choice for me. Yeah. And so, yeah, that was kind of like high school, middle school, high school and everything for me.
Yeah. I guess I kind of forgot to mention this a minute ago, but I just wanted to call out because I think that's so beautiful what you were saying, to go back a little bit to your mom's like prayer thing with you when you were a kid, of just honestly, like I I think I would actually, who's someone who's a very traditional Catholic in a lot of ways, I would actually say I think that's just a beautiful like Catholic prayer. Like that doesn't even necessarily, like I know you were jokingly saying that it's like a Protestant way of doing it, but honestly, I think that's something that we should incorporate more as Catholics.
Yeah.
Of understanding that like when we have, obviously we have the sacrament of confession of reconciliation in the actual sacramental way, but in general that like there are moments in our lives where it can be really profoundly helpful for us to say, I am accepting you right now, Lord. Like, I am making you the center of my life. Like, I want you to be instrumental in my life. And so, like, that's actually such a beautiful thing to me that your mom, like, did that.
Yeah, it was very beautiful.
Yeah. And, yeah, I mean, the college thing, do you feel like you had an awareness of the fact that, like obviously you described the Steubenville conferences as being, kind of like heaven or whatever, and that's beautiful. And I've heard I've never been to one, but I've heard a lot of really good things about Steubenville conferences. But do you feel like as a high schooler that you thought college would be like that in the same kind of high sense? Or do you feel like you had enough of a like grasp of like, it'll be good insofar that there'll be like mass and there'll be a lot of Catholics and stuff, but you understood that it wasn't going to be like the high of a conference the whole time that you're at college or whatever?
I guess it's a little more complicated, the answer to that question, because I knew it wasn't obviously going to be a retreat, but part of me thought it would be because people don't attend Franciscan. People rarely attend. Well, not rarely, but it's infrequent. It's more frequent than not that people attend Franciscan because it's Catholic.
Yeah, for sure.
So I knew I was going to be in an intense Catholic environment. And whether or not we call that a retreat, who knows, but I just knew that God was going to be like in my face everywhere all the time and difficult to ignore. And I'm someone whose spiritual journeys or throughout his whole spiritual journey is incredibly dependent, or has been up until like the past couple of years, actually, thankfully. I've been super dependent on those around me, like taking it as seriously as I do, because I remember reading somewhere that most people want to be friends, or really should want to be friends with people who are better than them. And that's something I've kind of lived by subconsciously. I hadn't been aware of it until I'd read that quote, but I'm attracted to people who I think are better than me, and who like when you led your Bible study, and you had the courage to like orchestrate it and be committed to it. It's because I saw something, I guess, now that I reflect on it, that I want for myself. And maybe that's a little narcissistic. I don't know, but it's just a good that I see in people. And I want this like iron sharpens iron type of type of experience. So I guess that's one reason why I was drawn to Franciscan, because I knew I'd be surrounded by people who were better than me, or who at least took the faith more serious than I did. And that would call me out of myself and constantly push me.
Yeah.
Because I think that's one thing that I like about the retreats the most, is that there's a certain number of people all focused on God, and we're doing it together, and we're bettering one another.
Yeah.
So I knew, Franciscan wouldn't be a retreat, but I knew it would be full of people who would make me better.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense, actually. And I mean, I think it's maybe important, too, to call that out of, like, to your point, like, the Catholic Church, the church, like, the body of Christ. Like, if you think about that analogy that is used so often in Scripture to describe it, we're not meant to be doing our faith journeys on our own. Like, I think that's one of the like fallacies that is so common nowadays, because we live in such an individualistic world, that people can get in their little silos and be like, oh, well, I'm supposed to have, and now don't get me wrong, like, sure, we all should be praying on our own at times and building up our own relationships with the Lord, but those relationships should ultimately lead outward to where, as we build up our relationship with the Lord, we're supported, encouraged, and challenged, to your point about iron sharpening iron, by others in that community. And so, like, that makes a lot of sense that you would have desired that. And I mean, just as like a, as a relating to it kind of thing, like, that's why I think I mentioned that in my story from the last episode of, like, I wanted to go to Franciscan. And that's actually pretty much the same exact reason why I desire to go to Franciscan. Like, through the circumstances that happened, I wasn't able to go, but like it was for that same reason, that I recognized something in me that I knew that I needed the support of good community around me, other like Catholics, other men who would like encourage and challenge me and all that. And by the grace of God, God ended up kind of providing that at Towson, where I ended up going, but in a much smaller way than what I would have gotten otherwise. But that makes a lot of sense to me of your reasoning why you wanted that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I found it at Franciscan. There are men there who, to this day, are so much holier than I. My goodness, like just to name a few. Like, I intended to this household called Disciples of the Word,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not sure if I intended for the right reasons. I think I did in a sense, and in another sense I didn't, because the way you intend to a household, like each household has a covenant, which is kind of a charter of principles that the household likes.
Do you want to maybe real quick explain what a household is at Franciscan?
Yeah,
too?
so a household is kind of like a Catholic fraternity. Okay, now when you think of frats and sororities, you think of you don't think of too many good things.
Yeah, unfortunately.
There is fraternity, there is sorority, I guess, but it's not really built around virtue in most of those cases.
Yeah.
The Franciscan household system seeks to create that environment, but surrounded by virtue, surrounded ultimately by God, or focused, centered around God.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what the household system is. There's boy households, girl households, and there's a lot of options, and they all follow different type of characteristics or different virtues, or like different focuses. So the household I intended to was called Disciples of the Word, and we emphasize Scripture a whole lot, and we were built on the pillars of purity, chastity, evangelization, and
Let's see if you can remember it.
humility.
There you go. Nice.
I'm pretty sure it's
I
humility.
hope that's right.
I know purity was. I know purity was first week. Was the first week. Chastity the second week. I think humility the second week. You would have thought humility would have been first, but purity, humility, chastity, and then evangelization. And I remember during evangelization week, you have to carry around a Bible all the time, and if you're caught without it, it's a problem. Like you're given. Yeah, if a household brother catches you without the Bible, like even at dinner or even while you're studying, like they will either give you like a physical challenge, or they will say, go pick a verse in the Bible and go share it with someone in the common area right now. Like it was kind of cool.
Dang,
it's
I
kind
like that.
It's kind of like spiritual hazing, which I'm actually very pro hazing. Not gonna lie.
You mean like in the spiritual sense, like what you just said?
I'm also pro like hazing. Like obviously, like what some of these fraternities are doing is just like straight abuse and assaults and degradation of the human person. But I think there's something about there's a charm to hazing as long as it's done in a non-abusive manner. Of like, hey, because if you plan enough sports teams, okay, like for example, the Seattle Mariners, okay, big baseball team that I grew up a fan of in Seattle, the bullpen, every rookie bullpen pitcher has to, I'm not sure if they do this anymore, has to buy a Princess backpack, and that has to be the backpack that they use throughout the year for traveling to and from the bullpen. And it's like teasing them, but it's also a way of saying, hey, welcome to the family. Like we're already like you only tease people who you're close with, and you only kind of like make fun of them, or you should be. Like if you make fun of someone who you don't really know, it's just in poor taste. It's kind of gross and it's not team building. But if it's already within the context of like, hey, we're becoming friends, then I think it breaks down. It's like a big icebreaker right away, and it makes someone feel involved. So I'm pro that type of hazing,
Yeah, which I mean, I completely agree with you. I think my only clarification was just because nowadays hazing has such a connotation of like all the, to your point, like abuse and stuff like that.
Yeah,
happens.
like you should be shoving people in lockers.
But that's obviously, those are obviously not okay things. Like you should never do, I would say in hazing, you should never do anything that is like immoral, illegal, like any of those things. And that's what often happens with a lot of like frats and stuff. But to your point, you can do like the Mariners thing is a great example of something that's like, there's nothing immoral or illegal about that. It's just funny.
Yeah, it's just
like a funny little joke that's like, oh, we're teasing this person or whatever. It's kind of like teasing in a sense.
Yeah. So it's like when you would intend to a household at Franciscan, like you would. It's different for everybody, but for our household, like some of like the best moments in college were when we would get an intent. So we'd have like a commitment, like we would do Lectio Divina on Thursday, and then we would. It was inside of a building, and we would be about to leave the building. And I remember like John Redman, who was our he was my big in household, really holy man, great guy. He was our household leader, and he would turn around right before we would exit the building. He's like, guys, I've got something to tell you. Because if you wanted to intent, you told the leader of the household, and the leader would be like, okay, you need to pray a little bit for a week. You need to do a few things, and then come back to me and tell me like if you still feel like you want to. And so if they still wanted to, they would set up, okay, you're going to intent after this commitment on Thursday. Okay. And so the commitment would end. We go to the door, and John would turn around and be like, guys, we've got something. And everyone would be like, we've got an intent, don't we? And he'd like get us like pumped up, like we're like Spartans about to go to war, okay? Like all 300 of us. And we're just screaming. He's like, we're going to get him, okay? Let's go. And we'd like burst through the door, and we'd be running like maniacs. And we'd find the intent, and then we'd like tackle them, you know? And then we'd tackle them and pick them up and carry them through campus, like chanting, okay? And then we go to our common room, and we had a picture of the Holy Spirit on the ceiling, and we'd press their body up against the ceiling. We'd be like, give them the Spirit! And we just, I can't tell you how many times we've bonked a guy's head because they're like, what? And then like they look up a little bit and just like, it didn't happen to me, but we're typically like one of our guys will be on it, and we'll hold the head back so we don't like hit their noggin right on the wall, on the ceiling. Awesome. But just like we're freaking, and then we'll like sing a song. Like, think about it. You tackle a person, okay? Like this is even evolving like some physicality, and then you slam their body into the ceiling. That's a little over.
Yeah, I was gonna say I would see.
But you're aggressively like pushing their body to the ceiling. You know, these are all uncomfortable things. But then we sing a song with them afterwards, and we just like embrace them and hug them. Like this is like things where you're like making other people uncomfortable, but it's totally done out of like love and charity.
Yeah, and, that makes sense.
Yeah, so
it's such an awesome like guy kind of thing too. Yeah,
dude, I love those moments. Those are so much fun. But yeah, so those were I found at Franciscan those group of men, and there are a lot of other great households on campus. But Disciples of the Word, I wanted to intend to them because I just saw men who I liked, and I didn't necessarily know why I liked them at the time. But I think what I recognized in them was just a holiness that I wanted. Like in John Redman and these other guys, Zach Wayner, and a bunch of men who just seemed to have it figured out, although they probably didn't, but just were striving for holiness. Yeah. And that's what I wanted. And so yeah, I definitely found it at Franciscan. That's also where I met my wife at Franciscan. Yeah. So
that's awesome. Yeah, so tell me about that. I mean, you met Emily at Franciscan, so what?
Yeah, so
what was that journey kind of like?
I was still not a great guy at the time, and I was dating someone when I went into Franciscan.
Like someone from back home?
Someone from back home. An awesome person. Great gal. She's happily married now, and has a kid, and I'm super pumped for her. It's just really sweet. I think what I just didn't realize is that we were just, I liked her a lot as a friend. Like she was fun to be around. But I wasn't necessarily emotionally attached, even though I thought I was. But she was planning on transferring to Franciscan, actually. Yeah, that's not why I went to Franciscan, obviously. And she said that she was going to transfer to Franciscan before we started dating. So I thought like, oh, it's okay if we start dating, you know, like you're not transferring for me. You know, you said you have already applied to transfer yourself. So I thought like, yeah, nothing wrong with it. But I remember going there, and at Franciscan, it was tough because there's a lot of beautiful women at Franciscan. And when I say beautiful women, I mean virtuous women. Yeah. You know, it's easily the most attractive quality in a person other than confidence is just being virtuous. Yep. All right. So a lot of great women at Franciscan. And I was like, oh, this is tough. You know what I mean? I've never been a man who like struggles with infidelity by any means whatsoever, because I find that to be pretty disgusting. Yeah, I mean that doesn't mean I don't find other women attractive, but it's just like it just seems dirty, you know? Yeah. So, but I just was like, oh man, like there's all these great women here, and it's like it's weird when you're at that age and people are always interested in one another, but you can't really. It's difficult just to be friends with girls. In those situations. Oh yeah. You know what I mean? I agree. That was probably like the crux of like the struggle that I was experiencing. Now with my wife, Emily, we had the same, we were studying the same thing, theology and catechetics. and we had some of the same classes, and even the classes we didn't have were at the same time. So daily mass is a big thing at Franciscan. Meals are pretty much all at the same time. So it eventually became a thing where my wife and I, or Emily at the time, were constantly running into each other because we would be going to mass at the same time or grabbing food around the same time. Now, I was a part of this freshman group of friends, okay, outside of my household. We were all pretty close. We were that annoying freshman group at every university that no one likes and just can't wait, and they just can't wait for them to grow up. Yeah, we called ourselves the Muffins, which in retro, which just makes me cringe. Like, hardcore thinking about it, dude. It's just great people. Don't get me wrong.
Is there a good reason for calling yourself the Muffins?
I don't friggin' know.
Other than you guys being all a bunch of softies, like what?
I have no idea. It was embarrassing.
That's fantastic.
I hate myself thinking about it, but I love them. I do. Oh my gosh. It was weird, dude. The first couple of weeks of college were wild. Like I was smoking a lot of tobacco. That's what I remember. That's what I remember. Because at Franciscan, there's not a lot of underage drinking that goes. I mean, it happens, okay, but at our time, this was America, and you could smoke at 18 years old. So a lot of people just smoked cigarettes.
Yeah.
I didn't smoke cigarettes, but a lot of people smoked pipes. And I remember like the first week, I think I smoked every evening with my buddy Andrew. Or then I think Andrew and I went to work out, and we're like, we need to stop because we're feeling the effects of the smoke. So but like that's kind of how I got to know these Muffins. Not all of them smoked, obviously. Actually, hardly any of them did. But they just somehow the groups that I first was hanging out with kind of like intermingled with them, and then I just hung out with them a lot. So I had a good, solid group of friends first couple weeks and throughout the rest of college. But it started with them, and I remember seeing Emily. And I'm like, oh, she looks cool. I thought she was pretty, of course. You know what I mean? Yeah. But I also noticed that she was like alone, you know? And like I'm messing with I'm thinking in my mind, I'm like, I should invite her to this group. But I also know like how that looks, you know?
Oh,
like a young guy goes to a girl. Right? Oh my gosh, dude.
I've heard all the stories.
Yeah. So I was like, I know how this looks. And I'm dating a girl right now at home. And I don't want to be disrespectful to her. But then part of me was like, you can't use that to justify not inviting a girl into community. Like that was my thought process. So I thought, hey, come to mass with us. Hey, like my friends and I, like we're gonna go to mass at noon. Okay, you should join us. That'd be awesome. Like right before lunch, right? And she's like, oh, that's really cool. Thank you. I'm like, yeah, my friends are really cool. But I showed up late to mass, like a complete idiot. Okay, not like late, but like mass had already started. My friends had already sat down, and Emily, imagine like St. Francis. The chapel is like.
I mean, I've seen the chapel at Franciscan.
Yeah. So the chapel, it's like maybe 20 rows, I guess, divided into 3 sections, like kind of stadium. Well, not exactly stadium style, stadium orientation. And I want to say my friends were like in the 6th row from the front. Emily was like in the 10th row from the front. So I was thinking to myself, okay, I can sit with my friends, but then Emily's going to see me obviously ignoring her and going to stay with my friends, or I can sit next to her, but that also risks leaving the wrong impression where we're sitting next to each other at mass. Like it sounds stupid when you talk, but you know what I'm saying, right?
Oh yeah.
I was like, oh, this is not the impression I wanted to leave on her, you know, where it's just she and I going to mass together, and I came up with this genius idea. All right, I'll sit next to her at mass, then we'll go to lunch together, and I'll just ignore her.
Oh my gosh.
Because I didn't want to like give off the wrong impression, you know. I was just, it was stupid in retrospect. Like it's childish.
I do get that though, because like you're trying to avoid, you're literally dating someone, and so you don't want it to be like you're like, I definitely get that.
Yeah, so I sat next to her, and we went to lunch, and we sat with my friends, and I just ignored her the entire time. And then I think I left with like barely saying goodbye. Because like I was so concerned about leaving.
Did she like talk with the group at all? Like,
yeah, she was talking with them.
Just like off on the periphery.
No. She was intermingled with them.
Well, that's
good, so it wasn't like completely rude, but I was intentional, I think, in like not emphasizing my goodbye, like my salutations, if you will. So I said goodbye, and I was like, okay, we're good, all right. But she did start hanging out with my group a little bit, but because our schedules lined up so much, we started going to mass at the same time, and then we started grabbing meals at the same time. So hanging out was almost it was inevitable.
Yeah.
And I thought she was really into my friend Brian, because my friend Brian is a good-looking dude. 6'5", gives excellent hugs. Okay. Very likable guy.
Yeah.
Very likable guy. Brian could get away with murder probably, and people would be like, you know what, the guy probably deserved it. Like, he's just one of those guys.
Yeah.
So I thought Emily was into Brian, and I was like, sick. This solved itself. You know, there's this girl who, if I'm honest, I was like getting some feelings for, but obviously felt guilty about that because I was already in a relationship, and I didn't want to do the thing where you break up with a girl to start dating another girl because I'd done that before, and like I don't know any relationship that starts off on a good foot, like when that's like is the first step. So, and I still had feelings for the girl I was dating, of course, and I was like, you know what, maybe when she like transfers here, that'll fix everything, kind of. But so Emily and I started hanging out, and I thought she was into my friend Brian. Turns out she wasn't. Okay. She was into me.
Yeah.
And so without revealing too much about my wife and I were having a conversation one night, and we were just talking about, like, you know how I was talking about earlier in my story, just like my struggle with chastity.
Yeah.
I was discussing my struggles with that, and I remember describing that there was a moment I was in a relationship that I just didn't know how to get out of, where I thought I was like, I've committed myself too much to this person. I don't know a way out, which obviously just breaking up with the person is like, that's a way out. But it just didn't, I felt trapped.
Sure. Yeah.
And I told her when I felt trapped, it was like, it was at this time is when I remember feeling trapped. And my wife, my girl, Emily, at the time.
Yeah. Like she wasn't, this is when you were just talking to her, right?
We were not. Yeah. Cause I was still dating this other girl. She looked at me and said, wait, what was that day? Like, what do you remember, like, when it was? I'm like, yeah, I remember when it was. I remember the day I felt trapped, or at least the weekend I felt trapped. And she kind of, like, responded oddly to it. And I'm like, okay, that was weird. And then I'm just like, okay, I'm going to head home. Or I'm going to head back to my dorm and, like, go to bed. And then the next day she asked if we could, like, a couple days later, she asked if we could talk about something. And I was like, yeah, sure, what's up? And she said, the day that you said you felt trapped in this relationship and that you couldn't get out, I was in adoration, and I felt God tell me that your future spouse is in a tough situation right now and needs your prayers. So
what?
There's a lot to unpack here.
Yeah.
Okay. And I was like, I was kind of mad. Like I was super uncomfortable.
Well, yeah, I bet.
Right away.
Because you were dating somebody, so you're probably like, this is what?
Well, first of all, this girl just told me that she thinks we're going to get married, basically.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying you're in the middle of dating someone else.
But
and
even
you're
if I
like,
wasn't,
wait, what?
Even
like,
if I wasn't dating someone, like, that's still something crazy to say, you know? But I also just remember, like, wanting to talk about it. And this is, like, probably one of the few times in my life where I've been like, good job, Rhys. You handled that pretty well. Like, I'm proud of you for that. I sat down and I said, I would really like to unpack this a little bit more with you. But given the fact that I'm dating with someone, I'm not sure it's appropriate for us to further dissect this topic.
Wow. Yeah. That's
like,
very responsible.
One of the
good
first,
actually.
One of the first few times, like, it's like the only time where, like, I don't question what I did in that moment. Every other action, my sinful self is like, I don't know, like, I probably should have done that instead. But because, like, once you enter into dialogue with that discussion, you begin opening up yourself up to the concept of dating that person. Like, and you're talking about it.
Oh, yeah.
And so that was, like, my thought process. And I'm like, I can't talk about this with you right now. And honestly, I should have been freaked out. Like, I'm like, this girl just told me, like, she thinks that, like, I'm her husband. Or I'm going to be her husband, basically. And to my wife's credit, she did pray about it, you know, and she talked to her friends, and she was like, I'm not sure if I should, like, tell him this. You know what I mean? And her basic logic was, if this was the opposite and I was in Rhys's position, I would want to know. Now, I'm not sure if I agree with that assessment, you know, but regardless, she did what she did. And she wasn't trying to be disrespectful at all to the girl I was dating. She just felt like I would want to know something like this.
Yeah, which, I mean, I think in her defense, like, you could also just make an argument that she can share that, and, like, you can take that however you choose to. Like, you could choose to completely brush that off and be like, well, that's cool, but, like, I don't think that has anything to do with me.
Yeah.
You know, like, I'm just saying, like, I think that's also a fair defense of her situation there, that, like, she she's sharing it. I mean, also like, not to call you out, because I think you actually did a great job in that circumstance. But it is interesting because the whole thing that began that whole thing, I think, is a fascinating thing though too, because I think you could argue that, based on what you were implying at least, that you may have been like sharing more than you should have in the first place.
Yeah, no,
Because of
definitely.
like
That's
the two of you not being in a relationship, and you're sharing these like deep things about these struggles you were having in your like own relationship or whatever with a woman, arguably may or may not be a good idea. But then you handled it really well
right.
in the next situation of like, all right, we should not talk about this in more detail right now. Like,
No, I agree with you 100%. I didn't handle the whole thing perfectly. I definitely did not. But fortunately, right then, I think I did.
no, exactly. That's what I'm saying. Yeah, I think
no,
that's the important thing, is that you then did handle it well.
yeah. So it was, and also in retrospect, like our relationship, like throughout tough times, has never been dependent upon that story. Like you could definitely see a couple being like, oh, well, like we had this prayerful experience, so we know we're supposed to get married. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So this tough thing we're dealing with right now, like we'll eventually get through it, you know? Like honestly, I forget about this story all the time because our relationship is so independent of that story, actually. So she told me that, and I was like I should have been freaked out, you know, I'm like, this girl's crazy. But for some reason I wasn't, you know? And so I kind of, I told her what I said. I told her, I'm like, we can't really talk about this. This just really isn't appropriate. So we should just take it easy for a little bit. So we did take it easy, and I prayed about it. And I was like, I don't want to break up with someone just to start dating another girl.
Yeah.
Like, I really like this girl. But then I came to the realization in prayer, God was like, Rhys, out of respect to the girl you're dating right now, you should break up with her at the very least. Like, just out of respect to her. Like, if you have this type of feeling towards another person, whether or not that turns into anything, it doesn't actually really matter, Rhys. Like, you shouldn't be with this other person. So I was like, okay, I guess that makes sense. That made enough sense to me, where I moved forward with ending the relationship, which sucked. I felt awful for, like, going back to like not being able to shake the future husband of like the girl you're dating. That was like probably one of my most shameful like realizations of that, because I will die on that hill that the girl that I was dating at the time is an excellent person who was just like, all girls are deserving of respect. Don't get me wrong, but it just, when the person is very virtuous and kind, it stings a lot more, if you know what I mean, when you don't show them the respect they deserve. So she was incredibly virtuous, and it breaks my heart to still think about it to this day, you know, that I feel like I like led this girl along. And she actually already had given up on transferring to Franciscan at this point.
Okay.
So, which was good.
Well, that's good. Yeah.
Which was fine. Yeah. We had actually talked about that beforehand, before I had broken up with her.
Yeah.
And maybe that contributed to a little bit more of like also the realization, like maybe this isn't the right relationship, but it definitely was not the key factor. So yeah, ended that relationship, and I told Emily eventually, like, hey, this relationship is over. But I don't think you and I should like pursue something right away.
That's healthy, I think. That's
yeah.
That's another, I would commend you on that as well.
Albeit 2 weeks later, though.
Oh, all right.
Like if I'm being 2 or 3 weeks later, you know what I mean?
Well, you know, right now, 2 or 3 weeks is not right now. So.
No, it isn't. It isn't right now. But I mean, it obviously was fast nonetheless. But,
Sure.
but it kind of happened in stages where like, okay, I don't think we should be like, we can go hanging out, and it's nice we can like hang out without like any worries, you know. And but eventually it got to a point where I think 2 weeks later, it was the St. Francis Festival, which is a big festival annually at Franciscan, where a lot of alumni show up, and there's adoration in the field house. And I decided, hey, let's go on a date. Like, let's not start dating in like the are we boyfriend girlfriend sense, but like, let's go on a date. And so I memorized her favorite wrap at the pub. Like we went to lunch one time just to grab a bite, and I memorized what she ordered, like because it's like Subway.
Oh, okay.
So I memorized the ingredients, and then I went back later that Saturday, and around like afternoon, I ordered 2 wraps, and I ordered the one that she ordered, the recipe, and then like I put it in my mini fridge, and then I bought like some sparkling apple cider, and then some like plastic like glasses.
Nice.
And I took over a gazebo in Franciscan with some candles and just surprised her with a dinner and music. And then we went to adoration after and prayed, which was, super cliche Franciscan dating experience. And later that night, while watching Avengers, the first movie, I asked her to be my girlfriend.
Later that night? Oh my gosh. Wow.
Out of all the moments, that romantic dinner after adoration, but no, when we're in the common room of the household known as Sacrifice of Love, I asked her to be my girlfriend while watching the first Avengers movie.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. So, yeah, it didn't begin on the greatest note, but it's honestly, if you think about it, there's someone you like and you have these feelings for, and they're obvious. Like, what else are you supposed to do at that point? Yeah. So, and obviously it's worked out pretty well so far. We've been married for 7 years, coming up on 8 years, 3 kids, and we're pretty happy together. It's not been perfect, don't get me wrong, but yeah, that's the story of how I met my wife, and that's how we started dating. And then we actually ended up getting engaged a year later. We dated for a year, but we went to France. We went to Austria the second semester of our school. Our freshman year, which is abnormal, but Emily and I were going to graduate. We graduated Franciscan in 3 years because we had, I did Running Start. She had a bunch of AP credits that transferred. So we had to be on a little bit of an accelerated track to graduate earlier like we wanted to and to save money. So we had to go to Austria right away, which we did. And a lot of traveling, a lot of uncomfortable situations. And honestly, the fact that we didn't break up was a good testament to the fact that this is serious. I think we're a good couple. We can handle conflict and we can argue.
Yeah.
But we were taking a class with Professor, now Dr. Robert McNamara. He is a doctor in philosophy, but he was teaching Marriage in the Family, a theology course in Austria. Nice. And we read Carol Boitia's Love and Responsibility.
Yeah.
And that book made me fall more in love with my girlfriend at the time.
Nice.
Reading it with her. Just what we mean by the spousal meaning of the body as it exists as a gift to another person. And yeah, that class helped me fall more in love with my wife. And helps, I guess is a weird way, but it helps me realize what love actually is and how I desired to give that to her. And then Emily and I just started having crazy conversations about getting married, which isn't crazy, but getting married young.
Yeah.
I kind of have a weird opinion on marriage because we're just there's a natural progression in relationships, for intimacy. But there comes a point when you're not married where it feels like you're just putting a pause on that progression. You understand?
Yeah.
I'm sure you can sympathize with that. And
I definitely can.
And honestly, I think if I thought about it enough, I would agree that every relationship is very, very different. Okay.
Oh, sure.
Some people can date a long time and after 8 years decide okay, now's the time to get married. I mean, if they're younger, you know what I mean? Let's say they started dating 16 years old kind of thing. Let's say they're going to become a professor, so they have to do grad school and everything. I guess I could kind of understand their arguments as long as they're living out a chaste life. But then there are other people who date 6 months, especially at our age, and just know right away and they get married. So I can kind of understand both situations. But Emily and I felt what if we got married before we graduated college?
Yeah.
When we were already graduating a year early. And we kind of said it jokingly that we thought about it more and more. And we actually realized, so Franciscan University is in a town called Steubenville where the cost of living is super affordable. Where if we actually lived in an apartment together, because my wife and I would not live together outside of marriage. That's just obvious. I don't think it was even a conversation. We just completely understood.
Proper good appreciation for that.
Yeah. It was it's not even something considered, even though it would have saved us thousands of dollars. You know what I mean? We're no, we're not living together unless we're married. So given the amount of money that it would save us, we were there actually is a practicality to getting married before we graduate college. And I guess you could have argued that we could have just gotten roommates with other people and lived in separate houses, but we also wanted to marry each other at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, exactly.
And start taking care of one another. And then, so we're this kind of makes sense, I'm convinced, you're the one for me. I love you. And why not? Why not consider it? So I remember sitting down with my professor, Dr. McNamara, and just kind of talking to him about it and asking for his advice. and he gave good advice. He said, don't act right now. Come back to it later, like in a couple months or 6 months, and if you still feel like it then you're probably doing the right thing. You know, like if it's something that God wants you to do, you're not going to forget about it.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yep.
So I was like, yeah, that's cool. And I remember my girlfriend at the time talking to Sister Joan Paul, who was a great nun at the Austrian campus, and she was really helpful towards my wife. So we were like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Let's do that. And I started talking about it with like my friends. And I remember talking about it with my parents when I got home from Austria. And I was like, Mom, Dad, I think I want to marry Emily like after our sophomore year of college, or junior year technically of college. And my mom and dad, like their response was freaking awesome. It was like my mom and dad decided not to freak out. And my dad, I remember him saying this verbatim. He's like, I just want to like celebrate the fact that you found someone who you think you want to marry. Like seriously. Like I just want to celebrate that you found someone.
Wow.
Yeah. He's like, let's not get into the logistics right now, Rhys. Let's just like dwell on that. Like let's just celebrate that for now a little bit.
Wow.
Yeah. So I was like,
Praise
wow.
God
I was
for
like,
that.
I was not expecting that from my father. I mean, my dad, like I said, very virtuous guy. But even then, like I was freaking out.
Yeah,
I
I
was
mean, you
scared.
could imagine a lot of parents would be like, "Oh, you should wait. You know, you guys are rushing it. You know, all the different things." So yeah,
Right.
that's
Right.
praise
Yeah.
God for that reaction.
Yeah. So that was great. Emily's parents eventually came around to it. They're obviously parents of their daughter who they love and care, and they have concerns, you know. But I remember coming home from college after freshman year and calling my future father-in-law and not asking for the blessing yet. But like, cause like asking for the blessing right then, first of all, over phone would have been kind of shallow,
Yeah.
but also kind of a blind side. So I decided to just have a talk and be like, hey, this is what Emily and I are talking about, just so you know. And I know you have your concerns. And I was able to answer his questions. I'm like, well, no, like we'd be able to save a lot of money, you know, for you, you know, okay,
Yeah.
because we'd be paying for rent and everything. And so we'd be saving you a lot of cash. And also, so I worked at a landscaping company when I was a high schooler, from sophomore year to junior year of high school. And the landscaping company also had a wedding venue. So, and they told me, Rhys, if you ever get married, obviously we got married in a Catholic church, but
Yeah.
if you want this
mean
place
for the reception,
if you want, like people did get married at that wedding venue, but if you want to use this place, we'll let you use it for free.
Wow.
Which is insane because usually people are putting in five figures for just a wedding venue.
Yeah.
So I also told him like, hey, and I know you're the father of the bride, so you're probably asking like, is this wedding going to be expensive? I've got the entire venue taken care of, buddy. Like I've got a free spot and it's a nice place and I've worked on it. I've cleaned that place before and it'll be big enough for us. So I think that also helped.
I'm sure. Yeah.
Helped a bit with some convincing. And my parents had their winery at the time, so we had wine provided. And one of the Pratts, Mary Pratt's husband, Randy, brewed beer, and he brewed pretty good. He brews pretty good beer. And he's like, "Yeah, I'll brew beer for your wedding, Rhys." And I didn't drink a lot of it because I was so busy. But man, I regret it because I remember like the one glass I had. I'm like, this is pretty good. I think it was like I don't know. Randy, if you're listening, it was like I think it was an ale because it was like darker, like an amber. But I just remember it being really good.
Nice.
So we, like I said, my parents are really friendly people, and so they've established a lot of connections. And they're not friendly for the sake of connections. But my wedding was literally kind of this, like where you and I are about to talk about community.
Yeah, that's what I was just thinking. It sounds like it was a very community.
It was a community wedding where everyone contributed.
Yeah,
and
that's awesome.
So that was really cool. Like my mom, my mom started working at a winery before they started their own winery. And this former winery is where my mom met this woman, Dina, who has been one of my mom's best friends ever since. She's a great woman. I worked for her and her husband's machine factory over the summers during college. They were really nice to me in providing work for me. And but she was also a caterer on top of that. And she makes excellent food, okay, with her catering company. And so she didn't completely cater the wedding, I think, because she decided to do like the wedding planning aspect, which is arguably more helpful than just catering. But she did provide like one of the main courses. So,
nice.
So,
Wow.
But this is like one of my mom's best friends, who was incredibly helpful in like making that wedding possible. So, yeah, and I remember what's another twist to this story. It was like a few weeks back from my freshman year of college, and I'm sitting down at my parish, Holy Cross, and the priest who I grew up with, Father Jay, DeFalco. Pray for him. He's got cancer right now, and it's pretty bad. It's really bad. He's going to he's going through experimental means to survive right now. So please pray for his soul.
Yeah.
Pray for his healing and all this stuff. So, but Father J. DeFalco was there since my family joined Holy Cross in like 7th grade, because he was kind of tasked by the Archdiocese to be the one that helps this parish grow. So I remember sitting down, and he walked up to me, and he just said this to me like out of nowhere. He's like, "Rhys, you need to make sure that you graduate college before you get married." Like, I hadn't even said a single thing to him. And part of me was like, okay, all right, this is like this could be an important sign from God that I need to slow things down.
Okay.
But then I decided, I'm like, okay, but don't just take this, like push back. And I pushed back, and I kind of told him the things that I've told you already in this conversation. And he actually like came around to it afterwards. He was like, okay, yeah, like he understood that I was going to finish college, that it was actually a good idea for us. And he, so I convinced him otherwise after he said that to me.
Yeah.
So I guess I took that as a sign from God saying like, hey, I'm going to test you right here, on this. Like, are you sure about this? And
and that makes sense.
Yeah, and my answer, I guess, was sufficient. So he ended up being the one who said our wedding for us, Father J. So, yeah, we convinced our parents, like, yeah, we're open to this. So that summer, I bought a ring, I remember.
Nice.
And we did, my best friend Brian and John, Brian's the one who went to the Catholic school that my dad went to in SoCal. So Brian flew up to Washington towards the end of the summer, and he and I hung out. Brian's a really talented musician. He can sing like nobody's business.
Nice.
I can play the guitar kind of. So he and I were jamming a lot freshman year, and we decided to do a show at my mom's winery. I guess there's a little bit of nepotism going in there, but we're like, it'd be cool to play at a winery. It's a small winery, or the one she was working at was small, and we just played a little gig. We played some songs, had a lot of fun, and then we decided to do a road trip from SoCal. Like, I was going to fly back down with him to Southern California.
Okay.
And we were going to do a road trip from SoCal with John all the way back to Franciscan.
Okay.
And we actually decided to also go from Franciscan to Maryland, where my wife is.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I was going to meet up with her parents at a local restaurant and ask for their blessing, ask for her father's blessing.
Oh, gotcha.
So I literally traveled thousands of miles to ask for my future father-in-law's blessing.
Wow.
But that road trip, that's a whole nother story. That was a complete blast. But yeah, so I had the ring. I'm traveling cross country with this ring. It wasn't exactly a straight line. We went from SoCal to Vegas, from Vegas to Zion National Park, from Zion to Moab, where we checked out Arches National Park, and then I think from Arches to Bryce Canyon, and then from Bryce Canyon we went straight to Denver.
Nice.
And then we hung out in Denver for a day or two, went to Mass, and then after that we just blew through the rest of the U.S. After that, we did go up to Michigan to hang out with some friends from college in Petoskey. We went body surfing in like Lake Superior, I think, or Lake Michigan. I don't know exactly which one it was, because I know Petoskey is kind of like right there on the edge between both. But it was so. And then we went straight from Michigan to Indiana. I think we stopped in Iowa City one of those nights. Iowa City, Michigan, Indiana. And then Indiana, we stopped in Steubenville. And then after Steubenville, we went straight to Maryland. And I surprised Emily. I did not.
Nice.
She did not know that I was going to be there. But I met up with her parents, asked for their blessing. We talked about it more, and they were like, sure, go right ahead.
Wow.
They're like, we don't have an issue with you, Rhys. Obviously, our concerns are that you guys are really young. But we have no problem with you. And I'm like, sweet. And thank you. And so later that semester, that fall, behind the Franciscan dormitory of Louis and Liz, my freshman group, the Muffins, this silly group, we like to have like a fancy dinner every once in a while where we would cook and we'd all dress up. So we did that freshman year. And then our sophomore year, we decided to do that. And I decided to ask Emily to marry me after that. Nice. So here's how I set things up. It was the day before I was going to propose. And I said, hey, honey, let's go into Pittsburgh for lunch. Let's go to a nice lunch. And I knew as soon as I asked that, she's thought like, oh, he's going to propose to me at this lunch, So I threw her off because I didn't propose to her after that lunch. And she's like, it's not today. And I'm like, I'm messing with her. I'm playing the game just like I did when I asked her to come to Mass, hang out with my friends. I'm like, I'm playing this game right now. And then we had that dinner that night with our friends. And then while they were cleaning up dinner, I went to this field, this kind of pretty field behind Louis Liz laid out a blanket, electric candles, got my ukulele, had some music playing. As she walked out, she sat down, and I played I Can't Help Falling in Love. And I sang it to her. I'm not much of a singer, but I can sing I Can't Help Falling in Love to at least an adequate level.
Yeah.
So I sang that to her. We danced to Skinny Love by Bon Iver, and then I asked her to marry me. And then we started going through marriage prep, and then got married that summer.
Nice.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a good time. And actually, what's wild? Actually, I'm not sure if I should say this.
Maybe
I probably
don't then.
shouldn't.
Yeah.
Well, it's just something something that ended up working out really well for us financially. It's not like illegal or anything, but it's like something that's not like, I remember the Franciscan person, like, whatever, just forget about it. But we ended up just saving a lot of money by getting married. And it worked out really well. We were married our senior year of college, and that was college, man.
Dude, that's wow.
Yeah.
Let's just take a break real quick, and then we'll finish this up. Yeah.
Okay, sounds good.
And we're back. So you got married in junior year, going into your senior year of college. That's pretty awesome. I actually I just on a general level, like I applaud that in general. Like I think that's something that today our culture, our world, like tends to like be like, oh, you should wait to get married till you have everything figured out and you're in such a good financial situation and all that stuff. And like I don't think a lot of those things are actually good reasons. Like every situation is unique. That I definitely agree with and acknowledge. I don't think there's a one size fits all for anyone.
Right.
But in that same way, I don't think that means that there's a one size like, oh, everyone should wait till they're in this perfect situation. Like I actually knew some people, a couple at MIT when I was there who they got married between their I think it was sophomore and junior years actually, but they'd been dating in high school. But but still, like they got married like halfway through college, and they well, actually, she wasn't a student at MIT. She was a student at another school in Boston. But the point is, like, they both were there. They were living together at that point. Like, they obviously didn't live together before they got married. They very much believed in not doing that. But in the same kind of way, it helped them like save money. It made things make sense. Like it's something where like if there's a really good reason to wait, fair enough. But like I think it's one of those things where a lot of the reasons that people give today, I would say, are not necessarily good reasons for waiting. Like if you're pretty certain and it just makes sense, then just do it. Like,
well, yeah. I mean, there's like I don't understand the practicality to the objection of like wait until like find like what you be poor apart or poor together. Like
exactly.
There literally actually isn't that much of an other than an expensive wedding. Which, to be honest with you, I think the expensiveness of weddings is a complete scam.
Oh, for
it's
sure.
expensive to get married in this country, and it's expensive to die. That makes no sense.
Yeah.
And it can actually be very affordable. Like in the Catholic standing, you make a small donation to a Catholic parish. That's how you like get married.
Mm-hmm.
That the Catholic parish isn't like I think they get married at the cathedral in Seattle. It's only like $1,000, which like someone might think $1,000, like for a place like that
for a cathedral, yeah.
Cathedral, $1,000. That's a steal.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same in Baltimore, I think, actually. But
yeah, like, and just to get married at a parish is like $150 to $350.
Yep.
So, like, that's literally almost all you would have to pay. Like, of course, there's, like, suits and everything, but, like, you don't have to wear a suit,
Well.
No. I agree. I'm a man. I think you should wear a suit. But, like, you don't need to go all, like...
I think the bigger thing is all the reception stuff is the stuff that's absurdly expensive nowadays. Yeah, like, all the, catering can be, like, 20 to 30 grand just for catering, depending on, like, what you're doing, what the venue is, what kind of catering you're doing. The venue can be 5 to 10 grand if it's a venue where it's just the venue. Like if the venue and the catering are together, then you're looking at like 30 to 50 grand. But it's just absurd how expensive all these things are. It's
and they're also just not necessary. I understand they're like a formality, but like I was talking to my coworker yesterday. He's Greek Orthodox, and he and his wife had a small Greek Orthodox wedding, like 25 people, and then they did the reception like 2 weeks later. And he was telling me, he's like, my wife and I looked at each other and we're like, we should just skip the reception. And you know what? It would have been fine. Like it would have had literally no impact on the actual marriage.
Yeah, exactly. So. Now, I think I will say this is something because I've always had a very similar philosophy to what you're saying, but I do think there's an argument as you and I are going to be talking about community in the future soon. Like, I do think there's an argument for the goodness of having a reception with some people from the community. But I think that's where part of like your example, I think that's part of what I love about the story you were telling about your wedding to Emily, that came together as a very community-based event. And I think that's something that makes it more meaningful and more beautiful to me. That
Why-
it's
why can't
not
it-
like some sort of artificial community thing where it's like we spend thousands and thousands of dollars to bring together all these people who barely know each other and like, you know, so that they can have a good time while like the couple is like, you know, that's the funny thing too. I've been to so many friends' weddings and like you talk to the friends afterward and they're like, yeah, like we didn't really appreciate that at all pretty much because like you're running around the whole time. Like, you know, first there's the pictures, then at the reception, you're trying to talk to people and like you don't really get a chance to eat or enjoy, you know, like, so like it ends up being more about everyone else than about you. And
100%.
that's okay in one sense, but I think that's where that makes sense more in the context of the community situation than it does in the context of like the way our world is a lot of the time now. But
To throw a community celebration just requires every family to bring one meal.
yeah,
That's super inexpensive. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Everyone brings one thing a meal, or one meal, and like one contribution to the meal, and then one piece of like a 6-pack of beer or one thing a bottle of whiskey, and like, I mean that's you're taken care of. Yeah, so I get that, but yeah, it's definitely something that should be celebrated.
but yeah. So I
Yeah.
mean, I commend you guys for sure. I think that's
Oh, thank
awesome
you.
that you guys were able to like make that choice and do that if that's what you're, you know, you felt like you were ready and so like just do it. Like
Yeah.
that's yeah, and so that definitely sounds like it helped. And then I guess how's the last few years of, you know, what is it, 7 almost 8 years now of marriage, right? And kind of not, you know, you don't have to go into a ton of detail, but I mean about your family and kind of how that's progressed and every time where you've, because you went to Franciscan, you got a degree in theology, right? Yeah. So
yeah.
then what kind of progressed from there too?
So my senior year of Franciscan, I knew I wanted to go to grad school. I wanted to at least get my master's. And we were in serious talks, Emily and I, about moving back to Austria, because there was this place called the ITI, the International Theological Institute,
Interesting.
which went the pontifical route with degree-wise.
Oh, that's cool.
And I knew professors like Dr. McNamara got a master's in theology there. I had a lot of respect for him. Dr. William Newton, who's a professor at Franciscan, taught there. And so everything was like seminar-based too. And I was looking at the curriculum, and it was all like into patristics and Thomistic theology, and I was super attracted to it. And it was very affordable, like $7,000 a year.
Oh wow.
Euros, but the transfer rate between euros
still
and
though,
yeah, I mean, even if it's 10,000 in America,
it's still way cheaper than a lot of grad schools. So
yeah, so I was very attracted to it, but because it was the pontifical route and I did not have a bachelor's in philosophy, it would have been 3 years for me to get the master's there. And we weren't sure if we wanted to live in Europe for 3 years. So we decided against it. And then we looked at the Augustine Institute in Denver, Colorado, and that's also a very affordable degree. And we decided to move to Denver right after we graduated, which was scary, but I was happy to get back to the mountains, like I said. Oh
Yeah,
my
I
gosh,
bet.
I was so stoked. And there's a good Franciscan group in Colorado, which we never really got close to, but we hung out with. It was kind of like it made the move more comfortable in our minds. But yeah, we moved to Denver, and that's I started studying theology at the Augustine Institute. We moved out there with no jobs. Like, it was going in very blind, but it felt like it was the right thing to do. Like, our discernment process was, we want to do these things. We're just going to keep trying them until God tells us no. So like, we're going to move to Austria. Okay. And then like, we just kind of had this realization, like, this isn't for us, you know?
Yeah.
And so that was God telling us no. And then God didn't seem to say no about anything in Denver. And it ended up working out. So within like 2 weeks, I got a job working at Safeway. And then my wife got a job working at a high school, which became very helpful because after my first year of studying in Denver, I got offered. I applied for a theology position at this high school that my wife was working at, and I got it. And that's how I got my first teaching position.
I don't think I knew that. I knew you had taught at that school, but I didn't know that it was through like Emily working.
Yeah,
there
because
first.
Emily was awesome. She started off as just like a front office girl, and then she was like, "There's no library at the school, but we have like 2,000-3,000 books. There's this room available. Why don't I just make a small library? I'll catalog it all for you guys. I'll set it up. I'll do the whole system." And they're like, "If you want to, go right ahead." And then they needed someone to teach yearbook, and she was like, "I can teach yearbook, for the second semester." So then my wife ended up doing the entire yearbook, and I think she took over the yearbook halfway through, which is very difficult to do, because like everyone who I've worked for or worked with who is in charge of yearbook, it's a crap show.
Yeah, it's a
mess.
nightmare from what I've heard.
So the fact that my wife took over halfway through the year and got it done is really impressive.
Yeah.
So she kind of like worked her way up, and then she got hired to be the campus minister, basically, her second year.
Nice.
So she
Wow.
worked up really fast.
Dang.
She's a really hard worker. And then I got my job teaching. So we actually taught together for our first year.
Nice.
Oh, we worked together for
at the same
at the
high
same
school.
place.
Yeah, that's cool.
So that was really fun. I ended up finishing my master's degree like 3 years later. Like I went crazy my first year at the AI at the Augustine Institute. I was full time, but then I took 3 classes during the summer, which is not normal.
Okay.
Usually you take 1 class over the summer or maybe 2. Okay. But I was like, can I take 3? And Dr. Bloom was like, go ahead, buddy. And one of the classes was actually like typically the final class you take. But I was like, I think I can do this. And Dr. Bloom's like, go ahead, you can try. And I did. And it ended up being fine. I'm not like some whiz kid. I don't want to give off that impression. But what really got interesting in Denver is around this time, my wife became pregnant. Right when I got the teaching job, she became pregnant with our first son, Ronan.
Nice.
Which was wild. Yeah. And that actually changed everything in my life. Obviously.
I bet. Yeah.
Obviously, it changed everything in my life. But Ronan was born, I want to say, well, I know when he was born. He was born.
I was thinking, didn't he just turn 5
I was thinking like
recently or
school year
something?
wise, because that's how my brain works. But he was born February 26th, 2019.
Well, wasn't it 5 years ago?
2019.
Yeah.
2019.
That would make sense.
Well, it's because the pandemic like throws off my timing a little bit.
I know, but I was just thinking, didn't he just turn?
Well, yeah. He
do
just
the
turned.
math,
No, yeah. You know, I just do the math backwards, right? But it's weird for me to say that he was born the year the pandemic started, but he technically wasn't. Technically
he
he was.
was born in the like academic year, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, no,
because
he
it is called
wasn't.
COVID-19.
No, yeah.
It's called COVID-19, but COVID didn't really become an issue until 2020.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So that's why my brain.
Technically, it started in China in November, but yeah, that's.
But that's
fair
why my
enough.
brain like gets weird. When I'm like, he was born the year the pandemic started, but I remember him being 1 when the pandemic started. Actually,
Yeah,
so
no, that
yeah.
makes sense. Yeah.
So we did that, and honestly, I want to say after 3 months of my son being born were probably the darkest moments in my life. Actually. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Why was that?
So I wanted nothing more in my entire life than to be a father.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing more than that's. So I guess I wanted to be a husband, but I could not wait to have kids and to experience a love that's incredibly unique, and irreplicable.
Yeah.
And I remember, I want to say it was the summer, and my wife had gotten a new youth ministry job because there was some restructuring that took place at the school we were working at. And my wife's position was actually cut because of budget cuts, which is unfortunate. But it was fine because she got a job doing youth ministry at the parish just down the road from the apartment we lived in.
Mm-hmm.
And so she was like, and it was a 12-month job, teaching's a 10-month job. So she's like, I'm going to go in. And I'm like, yeah, I'll just stay home and take care of the kid while I take a few grad classes. So I got a lot of like one-on-one time with my son, which was great. But I discovered something around, like I said, 3 or 4 months after my son was born. So what a lot of people experience is when their kid is born, all their imperfections kind of come to the forefront, all their issues, because they realize there's this thing that I'm raising that I love that I need to exemplify holiness to.
Okay.
And when you're trying to be a good person, if you're doing it maybe not in the right way, I don't know. When you're doing these evaluations of the self, all your imperfections kind of start to show up. And even some of your, I guess you could say, issues. And I discovered in the middle of that summer that I have OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. Now, obsessive compulsive disorder, everyone thinks it's like about needing to wash your hands, you know? Yes, that is OCD, don't get me wrong. But obsessive compulsive disorder is a little more complicated than that. It also deals with, like, you have a compulsion, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And unless you do that thing, you feel like out of whack.
Yeah.
Like if you don't do that.
Like people turning light switches on and off a bunch of times, or like opening a door or whatever, things like that. Yeah.
And also what's related to OCD is like phobias, like where you're irrationally afraid of certain things. Like there's like arachnophobia is where you're afraid of spiders, albeit a lot of people sympathize with that type of phobia, you know, being afraid of spiders. But phobia has become a problem when they're like silly, like people who are afraid of the ocean because they saw a shark attack. You know, it's like there are people who just do not like standing in the ocean. You know, because it freaks them out.
I don't particularly like the ocean, but that's not because of sharks. It's because of the waves and the fact that like you could get pulled in and killed very easily. But
maybe here's like a better example. Like you're afraid of going. Like no, it is.
No, I think that's a good
okay,
example because you said because of sharks. I was just kind of clarifying.
Like,
but yeah,
it's rational
that's
to be
a good example.
It's rational. It's a good. It makes sense to be afraid of sharks, but it's irrational to be afraid of the entire ocean at all times.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
That's the point because there's no reason to expect like the odds of a shark coming that close to the shore in some random, like it happens, but the likelihood that it's going to happen is very unlikely. So it's not worth being, yeah.
So, I had some phobias that popped up that I'm not really going to unpack.
No. Yeah, you don't have to get into detail, but that's just interesting.
But I had some phobias that popped up that prevented me from like doing my job as a father, actually. And it was really tough. Wow. I was talking to Emily, and like I was just crippled by this phobia because I wanted nothing more than to be a father.
Yeah.
And now that I was a father, I was terrified of being a father. And I actually, so I got to the point where I thought I was failing as a dad, that I was hurting my wife emotionally by not doing what I thought I should be able to do, especially while she was working. And I got to the point where I saw myself as a monster, just a really bad person. Wow. And there were 2 times I eventually started seeing a therapist, but I didn't start seeing a therapist until I decided for the first time that I wanted to kill myself, actually. So I never attempted to kill myself, but I took steps to kill myself twice throughout this point in my life. So there are 2 types of general ways where people kill themselves. One is premeditated, where they're like, this is it, life is too tough, I'm going to do this. Then there's the way that they think Anthony Bourdain killed himself, who was like this famous travel food chef, and his was like a sudden decision where people they have a bad experience and they begin spiraling. Like, when people get angry and they punch a hole in the wall.
Yeah.
People have these tendencies that when things go bad around them to just spiral really fast. That's how people think Anthony Bourdain killed himself.
Okay.
The first time that I decided was kind of like that. And fortunately, I was in a situation where I was not really able to like spiral the way that I wanted to. Praise God for that.
Yeah.
But in that moment, I knew that I was like, okay, I need to go to therapy.
Yeah.
Which I hated. I hated therapy. My therapist was a great woman. Don't get me wrong. There was this excellent Catholic therapy program or spot in Colorado. I think it's St. Raphael's. If I remember correctly, great people, excellent. If you're a Catholic and you need therapy, find a good Catholic therapist.
Yes.
And I think you even mentioned.
Yeah, I did on my last. That's what I was just thinking. I said that on mine too. Yeah.
Yeah. So I talked to her about a lot of these things, and like I kind of like the internet is a disgusting place, man.
Yeah.
Like if you have fears and anxieties and you're looking for affirmation on the internet,
it will magnify them.
Don't go there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I did that, and I was able to discern that I had some phobia and some OCD. And so I went into this therapy session, kind of having a vague understanding of that. And my therapist.
Did she actually diagnose you with OCD, like officially?
Yeah. Well, see, this is confusing. I'm not sure a therapist can technically diagnose you. I think you need a psychotherapist. Like
if they have a PhD, they can diagnose you.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Even in psychology.
I don't remember exactly because it's good when I know there's a different process. I never was on medication. Fortunately, some people do need medication. I can understand that. But I never got to the point. And I remember my therapist saying, if you get to the point where you think you need medication, okay, you will need to see another person to do an extra diagnosis thing. So I wasn't exactly sure.
Well, that would be the medical diagnosis. You have to have a psychiatrist for that. But
yes, that's right. Okay, so I needed to see
that's for the medication aspect, but a trained psychologist can diagnose.
Yeah, so the psychologist, she did diagnose me with she knew right away, and I could tell too. And she actually said that she struggled with it as well, which is why she decided to become a therapist, which is really cool. So what I find really helpful about meeting with her is that she knew, like, not just from a psychological perspective, but from an experiential perspective, like what I was going through. Um, so she was really helpful. Don't get me wrong. And like I remember having a flare up in OCD when I moved out here, and I called her, and she didn't even charge me for the session.
Wow.
Yeah, she was like, I was like, how much do I owe you? She was like, just this one's on me, Rhys. Don't worry. She was people there. They really care about their people.
Yeah.
So she so I started going to therapy, and it honestly really it helped a little bit at the beginning, but then I was kind of stagnant for a while because with like OCD and phobia, the only way to really overcome it is exposure. So to dive a little deep into like my phobia, I didn't hold my son for like 4 months when he was a baby. Like it wasn't after he was born. Okay. Like for the first like 3 months, 4 months, I was like holding him, taking care of him. But for like 4 months after that, I like was afraid to hold him. So you can just imagine like how angry I was with myself, wanting to like be the man. Like you hear so many about fathers being distant from their kids.
Yeah, and to your point, if your wife's at work, then I'm sure you felt even worse because who's gonna hold
right.
him?
Like it never got to a point where like, oh, he's crying and like no one can pick him up. Like it wasn't like that, but like I didn't like truly like hold my son.
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know what I mean?
that's what I mean. Yeah,
And so that was really difficult, obviously, and I was super concerned about how people were viewing me, like especially at mass. You know, it's like, why doesn't Rhys ever go back and take his turn with the baby? You know, or so I felt the pressure. I felt like the judgment, which because I was like, I would be judging someone for not being a good father, you know, and maybe there's definitely something wrong with me in that. But
yeah, I was gonna say maybe it's better not to judge.
Well,
people
it definitely isn't. But like it's.
But I get that.
I was like,
I totally get
here's
that.
how I look right now. I look like a terrible father, and so that compounded my OCD. But the only way to overcome it was exposure therapy. So, and exposure therapy sucks, especially when you take those first initial steps. So, and there's no therapist at home telling me to do these things. Like during the session, she's like, you should try this, Rhys. Okay.
Yeah.
But there was a big part of me throughout this whole time that still was convinced that I was a monster, you know? And I remember having a moment one other night, like we were actually in Moab at Arches National Park, and I had a really bad, like just OCD phobia moment. And I decided again, like, I'm just like, I can't do this. Like it would be like, my logic is that if I'm the monster in the family, and as a good husband and as a good father, you defeat the monster. So, but what happens if you're the monster?
So you have to defeat yourself.
Yeah, exactly. And there are many ways to defeat yourself, but my logic was to just get rid of myself. And running away from my family wasn't an option because, like, I was thinking, like, no, my wife needs to be able to remarry. You know, so my wife talked me down from. I wasn't up anywhere. I'm not nothing like that. But like, she talked me.
You mean like off the
like emotionally,
like
the metaphorical
whatever,
ledge? Yeah. She talked me down, and there's this weird state in people who have issues with anxiety, like maybe you've experienced this before, where you reach a point of heightened anxiety where your body goes to a stage of apathy, like your mind like shuts down. Because the way anxiety works is when the brain is firing so quickly that you can't process what you're going through and you're overwhelmed and you can't actually relax even though you're sitting perfectly still. So if you've ever read Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, have you read that book?
No,
but you know about it, right?
Yeah.
He talks about the I think it's the second stage of prisoners in concentration camps in World War II. The second stage is always apathy because it's a defense mechanism.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And I didn't realize it, but I've read Man's Search for Meaning like 3 or 4 times because I would teach it to my classes. And I remember after reading it a time after I had gone through this, I realized like, oh, my body, that's what my body was doing during those moments. As I went into a stage of apathy as like a defense mechanism. And it's like it's where your brain like actually just kind of shuts off for a second. And it's kind of nice, actually. It's kind of nice to have God made it that way. Because those are moments where like they kind of save you.
Like you're so overwhelmed that you just shut down sort of.
Yeah, and you kind of need to.
Yeah.
Like you just gotta like, I need to recalibrate. So that was like my last really dark moment. And my therapist, I told her about it, and she's like, next time that happens, you need to call me, okay? And then we need to get you on a medication, okay? Next time that happens.
Yeah.
That's what we're going to do. Praise God, it never did. but she explained to me, like she really helped me on, I think this is how she described it, creating new pathways in your brain.
Mm.
So when
Yes.
you have a thought, okay, someone with OCD is inclined to have a really negative reaction to it, okay, and to obsess over that thought. But she says what you need to train yourself to do is to have new reactions to certain thoughts, basically conditioning yourself. And it's really difficult because like what she would suggest me to do is when you have something that triggers your OCD, you need to say to yourself, you are not your OCD. You are not your OCD.
Mm-hmm.
You ever listen to 21 Pilots? You ever hear about
Yeah.
that?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, Tyler Joseph struggles. It seems he doesn't say it explicitly, I believe. Maybe he does somewhere. I haven't done it.
I think he has said something about his health
Yeah,
struggles.
and actually in his album, he distinguishes his OCD self with a different name. Like he personifies it actually, not in an empowering sense, but he does it in a sense to distinguish himself from another. He's saying basically, I'm not my OCD, and that's what my therapist said. And I remember practicing that, and like nothing. I didn't feel anything, but somehow after like months and months of doing it, it just clicked one day, and not perfectly. But my body started to stop physically reacting to these like OCD and like phobia triggers. So praise God.
Wow.
But it was about a year of hell in which I thought like I don't know how I'm gonna like make it through the end of life.
Yeah.
I just don't think that's gonna happen to me. And somehow towards the end, like it was actually the pandemic, dude. The pandemic was great. Like
You mean like it kind of helped you to?
well, it was like I was home again. I was working, okay, but I was home all the time,
Mm-hmm.
and it was a great time of exposure therapy for my son. My son started walking around that time. I remember the first time I held him, and he just laid his head on my chest, like he had missed me. You know, like I was still like I was not. I'm probably painting a. It was still dark, but I wasn't like an absentee father. Like I was still hanging out with him. I was playing music with him, but I was incredibly uncomfortable around him. And that was difficult. But the pandemic was great, and I started holding him again. I started carrying him a lot more, and now I still have OCD. Like it's just like it doesn't leave you.
Yeah, I mean, of course,
but
you learn how to manage it.
I learned how to manage it, and it doesn't really prevent me from being the father that I want to be anymore, which is awesome. But it's that was a dark time in my life. Like I was very angry with God. I didn't understand why I was going through it, especially when it's something that I wanted more than anything was just to simply be a father, to be a caring husband.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it was the moment in my life where it questioned me to like believe in God. But a lot of good has come from it. You know, I appreciate my children a lot more.
Yeah.
It's really easy to grow complacent, I think, but just every time I get to hold them and love them and hug them, it's like it's a total gift. But it's just wild. Like I wasn't gonna say this actually, but I won at John Carroll. I won Educator of the Year.
Oh wow!
Yesterday.
Congrats! That's
Thank
awesome.
Thank you. And it's just kind of funny to think in retrospect that like 5 years ago I was ready to just give up on life. And I was a completely different teacher after that. Like I remember students coming back after my first year of teaching, like noticing like something was wrong with me. Like it just kept happening. Like you seem a lot more, you're somber, Mr. Gadbois. Like you're quiet. And I was known for being energetic. And so like I thought, like it changed who I was, and I didn't think I'd ever become really anything. And it's just like I'm not the end. I'm still like really young, you know.
Yeah,
Not even halfway through life, hopefully. But,
yeah.
But a lot of good has come from it. A lot of growth has come from it. My wife, holy shit, like she is so awesome. Like her love for me helped me better understand myself than I could during those moments. Because during anxiety, like you're blind to reality.
Yeah.
And you can't interpret even yourself properly. But when someone who authentically loves you is able to tell you who you are when you doubt that, like I think of many other women who would have just left me in the situation and been like, I'm too much.
Yeah.
But my wife, Emily's like, no, I know exactly who you are. Okay. This is you, Rhys. The rest is a lie, and you're a good person. So my wife is a friggin' saint. All right.
Yeah.
Like, my goodness, an absolute gift. And pray for me, because there's going to be a time where I'm going to be asked to do the same. Like, she hasn't had a crisis like mine, but just odds are eventually something will rise. And
Yeah.
I think frequently about, can I be as holy as she was in those moments? And I want to be, and I'm going to I'm going to need to pray a lot and be dependent upon God's grace. But because what she did was heroic, I would argue, what my wife did.
Yeah.
Yeah, she was a stud. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Wow, that's beautiful. That's tragic, but like incredible graces they come from that, and like thank you for the vulnerability to share that. I mean, I'm sure that's a challenging thing to even like face and think about. And yeah, I mean, I can't even imagine how tough that must have been to go through that whole experience, and to obviously still, to your point, like, to still be kind of going through life knowing that you have OCD. Like, how do I keep managing this? How do I live well? How do I, make sure that that goes well? And yeah, I mean, I think that's a good, encouraging story too for people to hear, especially, youth and people who have struggled with depression or anxiety or, whatever that's led them to maybe have those similar kind of thoughts at some point in their life. To just hear that, that encouragement that it, it can get better, that you can find ways to get through it. That's, yeah. And I think the love of another is so, I mean, it's such a beautiful thing to think of the ways that Emily, I'm sure, has supported you and loved you and encouraged you over the years, and like helped you see, like you said it yourself, but I can totally imagine that. I've even started to see that in my relationship, and like I'm not anywhere near, you've been married for 7 years, but and known her for almost 10 years, but I can totally imagine how the heart of a woman who, just knows you so well can help you to see the things that you don't see yourself, and to just be there and like, yeah, it's just, it's beautiful.
Yeah, it was, yeah. Yeah, it's in a world where we're constantly told to think about ourselves. It's my wife deciding not to think about herself and think about others that really saved me. And that's honestly one of the better medicines for people with anxiety, is to not think about yourself. Because anxiety is literally you obsessing about yourself. And I don't mean to say all people who are anxious are narcissists. That's not what I'm saying at all. But the remedy to that is to just think of others. And it's like easier said than done, but like a good way to do that is like to go out and help others physically.
No, but I think you're definitely right. I think a contributing factor for sure to it's not narcissism, but I think a contributing factor to what is encouraged so much prevalence of things like anxiety nowadays is the fact that we're encouraged oftentimes by the world to be very selfish nowadays, to be very self-focused. Like, and that's not necessarily narcissism. It's just being more self-focused, being more selfish, and like those things, to your point, definitely lead to more anxiety, because we get all up in our own heads and like, oh my gosh, like I mean, we've all been there, like, of I'm not good enough for this reason or that reason, I'm so bad at this, I'm so whatever, like, and like just like take a step out of that, like you're saying, and just think about like, how can I help this other person? How can I be there for this other person? Like, that definitely helps.
Yeah, and there are those people out there who think like all I do is give and I don't receive, and there is something very real about that. Don't get me wrong. But I would just suggest at that point, try and give to different people. Like give to people who do reciprocate,
or who do receive, at least. I think there's
receive.
even a difference between reciprocation and receiving too.
That's true, because people who receive do appreciate, and I think that's a gift to be received as well. So, yeah. No.
Yeah, wow. And now I mean, like you said, like you just had your third child a few months back or whatever, and
and I'm throwing him in the air, I'm hanging him upside down, and it's like it's
nice.
Yeah, I'm really thankful. But I mean, it's like I still have flare-ups, it still happens, but I remember, as my therapist was telling me, she's like, you're going to have flare-ups for the rest of your life, Rhys.
Yeah.
But now that you have the tools to manage it, it's like it's not as big of a beast anymore, And yeah, I feel awful because I see these kids I teach, and I feel like almost all of them have OCD. Almost like all of them are anxious. And I can't imagine the hell that is their mind. And I can imagine the hell that is their mind. But I can't, I don't want to imagine being back in that place, or what it's like to be back in that place. Because it's difficult to get out. It's not like you just do it at 1 second. It's like it's an exercise. It's a physical exercise for the mind.
Yeah.
And
yeah, I mean, there's this great like Christophonic. He's a Catholic like speaker and stuff. He has this really, I mean, it's really funny, but I also think it's kind of awesome thing that he'll like say at conferences and stuff of like, he's sort of saying it jokingly, but he also means it of like, your head's a bad neighborhood. Don't go in there alone.
I've heard, yeah.
And like,
Yep.
that phrase is meant to mean kind of two things. Is the way I look at it usually is like, on the one hand, like, make sure that we have a relationship with God, that like when we do like stop, because I think that's one of the things people get so scared to like think too much, because if you have silence and you think, then you end up in your head, and your head is kind of like you said, our heads can be a very like scary, like dangerous place or whatever. But then bring the Lord into that, like pray, like bring the Lord into that. But then also I think that's where it is helpful to have close friends, a spouse, if you're, at that age, like all those different things where you can like share your head. I mean, I've been discovering that myself more and more recently, of how much some of the like wounds from my past and stuff like still affect me in ways that I don't even realize that they're going to until it happens in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And like being able to dive into that with Shannon, my girlfriend, or like with, like with a spiritual director or my therapist or whatever, can be such a like helpful, and bringing it to the Lord in prayer, all of those things, but is so helpful, because the more that something just remains in our head, the more I think we just get all twisted up over it and like overthink it and all that, versus like bringing it out into the light with someone who can like receive it, like you're saying, and be there with you and walk with you. And yeah,
the mind is a wild thing, and it's easy to get trapped in it. And sometimes, you need someone to help you unwind it all and clean up the mess. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Well,
do you have anything else you wanted to share about your story before we kind of wrap this up? Or
no, I mean, just what's been really helpful for me is just being okay with discomfort. After, like, I didn't pray a lot when I was dealing with my OCD, because I just didn't like silence, And what actually was the turning point for me was like Pints with Aquinas, was listening to witnesses, because I've always struggled to disconnect theology and philosophy from prayer. Like some people are like, oh, you can get too intellectual about it, like, and I get that, but there's a big part of me that just sees the two as so intertwined. Like, I just can't help.
What, theology and philosophy and prayer?
And prayer, yeah.
Yeah, they are supposed to be intertwined.
Which they are, but like it's I know some people struggle with like intellectualizing the faith too much, But I don't really, unfortunately, I just don't really struggle with that.
That's good.
So I was able to be spiritually nourished outside the sacraments via Pints with Aquinas, and that just made me more and more comfortable with prayer again. And now, because of men like you and our men's group in Exodus 90, and my wife, and just community, prayer has like just become a big part of my life.
Good.
Again. And you got to pray. You got to be dependent upon the sacraments. And sometimes God cripples you because he wants you to lean on him, just to remind you of like, this is how you get through life. It's through me and not through yourself. Because otherwise you just fall off the trail probably. Yeah. So praise God.
Yeah, I mean, well, I want to commend you. I mean, both for your openness, your vulnerability in this. I mean, it's just, I think it's really cool to hear like a lot of the, the fun things from your childhood and growing up in the West and the mountains and all that. And then to like the beauty and the challenges and the darkness of what life can be at times. And that just is really incredible to hear that witness and to see that. And I think it's good for a lot of people out there to see the witness of your journey, of, the ways that you've kind of progressed through your life, through the faith, your relationship with Emily, and then the struggles that you had and continue to, work through with OCD. Like that's just such a beautiful witness to see. So yeah, I mean, I just want to commend you in that, and, encourage our listeners to take that for what they can and help that, to hopefully be a witness to them too. Like you were saying about Pints with Aquinas, like maybe this, maybe these podcasts can be a little bit of that for certain people who might be struggling with various different things. So
yeah, if they can, amen. Praise God. And thank you, Peter. I really appreciate it. Yeah. That means a lot to me.
All right. Well, everyone, this has been Of Mountains and Men, and I'm Peter Myers, and
I'm Rhys Gadbois.
Stay fun, everybody. God bless.
God bless.